Adeloju, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. Thank you very much, sir. The Program Officer of the Ford Foundation is also here with us. Please, let's put our hands together as we recognize Mrs. Olufunke Barua. Thank you. One of the contributors to the seminal position paper on climate change and the green economy is a very distinguished Nigerian. He retired from the University of Lagos. He's put his services at the disposal of the UNDP. He is retired, but definitely not tired. We welcome Professor Emmanuel Oladipo. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you. May I also specially welcome Amara Mwakba, Director of Public Policy at the Shehu Musa Yaradua Foundation. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's an interesting place to hide out, but it's okay. We are really honored. We also welcome the Senior Environment Specialist at the World Bank, Ms. Drita Dade. Thank you. Thank you, Drita. Mrs. M.M. Okun, thank you also for honoring us with your presence. Please, where are you? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I must also very specially recognize our chief host, the founder of Agora Policy. He has had a 5-year stint as Executive Secretary of the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, NITI, an experience which he has documented in his highly regarded memoir, The Arc of the Possible. He's a newspaper columnist, a policy strategist, and is playing host to us today at this program. Please, let's specially welcome Mr. Waziri Adio. Most distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we also expecting some other distinguished Nigerians and even friends of Nigeria who may not be Nigerian to be a part of this process. We welcome you all. I think I saw my friend Simon Kolawole a while ago, although he said I shouldn't recognize him because he just, what is the other word for Jakba when you come back in? We have to evolve one before. Jakpada. Oh, okay. Yes, Simon, thank you for Jakpadaing. We are indeed honored by your presence here today. Simon Kolawole, also a seasoned journalist and the publisher of the Cable newspaper. Thank you, sir. There are other friends. If I have not recognized you, I saw my brother, our big uncle's son, Mr. Ogochukwu. Thank you also. Thank you for being here. We thank Chido Onuma. Let me not mention the alias for obvious reasons. Yes, I didn't even mention security. Thank you, Chido Onuma, for being a part of this process as well. We shall recognize others as the morning gets younger. Thank you all for honoring us with your presence. It promises to be an exciting one. It's an unusual topic. What most of us are used to is change in weather, but not so much climate change with all its technicalities and implications for the economy, for agriculture, for our health, and so on and so forth. We only hear, oh, weather don't change. It'd be like, say, this place too hot. Either you pull off your shirt, if you are a man, or you drink plenty of water, if water is available. But there are all kinds of implications. We'll have the privilege of the opportunity of delving deeper into this today and then see what we can do to bring this subject to the greater Nigerian public. I thank you all for your presence here. My name is Ohi Alegbe. I'm happy to be here. I can't possibly welcome us all as formally and as warmly as our chief host can. Please, let's welcome Mr. Waziri Adio as he welcomes us all formally.
In the interest of time, please permit me to stand on existing protocols so that we don't waste people's time. But distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's my special privilege for me to welcome you to this special occasion on behalf of Agora Policy and its partners. The Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation, the cable newspapers, the Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development, the Center for Climate Change and Development, Clean Technology Hub, and Nature News. As we welcome you, we also thank you. We thank you for your esteemed presence, for your valuable time, and for the considered thoughts and inputs that you are going to bring to bear on today's proceedings. We do not take any of this for granted. Thank you. Our special gratitude also goes to the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, especially to Dr. Kole Shettima and his remarkable colleagues at the Foundation's office in Nigeria. Not only for supporting this event and the reports we are presenting today, but also for taking a bet on Agora Policy. Within just 2 years, Agora Policy has established an outsized profile in the think tank space in Nigeria, with a series of policy papers, high-level events, and workshops on policy analysis and advocacy. Without the catalytic support from MacArthur Foundation, this wouldn't have been possible. Sir, we thank you for your faith, for your guidance, and for your backing. Thank you so much. We're also grateful to the authors of the seminar report on the impact of climate change in Nigeria. Professor Chuks Okereke, Professor Emmanuel Oladipo, Ms. Ifeoma Malo, and Dr. Fola Eno. Our gratitude also goes to Dr. Abiba Dagash, Dr. Akinyemi Akinyuha, and Dr. Mohamed Aminu for their critical inputs into the report. We equally thank our eminent resource persons for today, Mr. Abubakar Sulaiman, the CEO of Sterling Bank, Mrs. Olufunke Barua of the Ford Foundation, Mr. Tengi George Ikoli of NRGI, who will join us shortly, Mr. Amaranwakpa of the Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation, and Mr. Oyi Alegbe, a media elder statesman, and our master of the ceremony for today. We have invited you here for 2 reasons. One, for the public presentation of the 84-page report by Agora Policy entitled Climate Change and Socio-Economic Development in Nigeria. And 2, for a deliberation on how Nigeria can minimize the burdens and maximize the opportunities of climate change. Organized as part of the preparation for COP28, this event aims to contribute to raising the status and the depth of climate change discussion and action in Nigeria. I do not intend to preempt the highlights of the report, which will be presented by the lead author, or the candid and robust deliberation that we're here for. But permit me, please, to say a few things as a way of setting the stage. I will start with what I consider the obvious, and that is climate change does not enjoy the prominence it deserves in Nigeria. Yes, there are some individuals, organizations, both local and international, and government agencies that are making a strong case for and designing and implementing consequential climate interventions in the country. Some of them are here with us in this hall, and some are online. We salute them. We thank them. But the sad and inconvenient truth is that climate change still does not rank very high on our policy agenda and in our popular imagination. Both in official circles and among the populace, climate issues are not seen as really important and urgent. Our national attitude oscillates between denial and indifference. Most of our people, including highly placed government officials, see climate change as other people's problems, or an issue that is only for tree huggers and environmentalists, or something that should bother only those who have the luxury of not wrestling with hunger and existential matters. As we say in Pidgin, something for people who don't belly full. And just as a rider to that, we also were all here during the presidential debate, and climate change barely registered. And even when questions were asked, the responses were, just vacuous, right? Or because we are a people of fantastic faith, we simply think and believe that the negative impacts of climate change will never be our portion. But the burdens of shifts in climatic conditions are already our portion. They are all around us. The rise in temperature, the irregular rainy patterns, the near perennial flooding across the country, the increasing threats of desertification and gully erosion, and others already have deep negative impacts on food production, food security, and food inflation, and on water, on health and productivity, on energy and infrastructure, and on the conflicts that continue to multiply, partly on account of vanishing natural resources. Whether we accept it or not, whether we think it is other people's or our own edict or not, whether we think it's our portion or not, climate change is already exerting a big toll on the things we consider critical and urgent. It is already here and now, not a matter of hereafter. And it's simply not something we can wish away with faith. And because it is multidimensional, because of its multidimensional and ramified nature and its multiplier effects, climate change is the most existential threat that we face today. And it is projected to get significantly worse within a few years. This silent crisis of today is likely to escalate into a catastrophic one soon, unless we act urgently, intentionally, and boldly. There are additional reasons for greater urgency. We are a resource-intensive but ironically energy-poor country. The global transition away from fossil fuels poses grave threats to government revenue at all levels, and also to our capacity to provide the much-needed power for homes and industries. Our capacity to fight poverty and achieve the MDGs and to increase national productivity and competitiveness may be further compromised. The transition away from fossil fuels may be paused for now in the aftermath of Russia-Ukraine, but it will be paused for too long. In a related but significant vein, the energy transition is creating a new economy, an intense scramble for critical minerals already spawning instability all around us, and a strategic positioning by countries to ensure that their interests are well served in the emerging new economic order. Where are we as a country in all of this? That's a question for all of us to answer. But let me conclude by saying we cannot afford to be a bit player, except we are content with holding the short end of the stick, or to be further consigned to the margins of existence. We need to see climate change as the central development challenge for our country, not in the future, but today. And we need more than a conversation or the commitments of the converted. We need an all-of-society approach. From political authorizers to policy wonks to the ordinary persons in the streets, on the streets and the homes, we all have roles to play, and we all need to act differently. Again, we say welcome to you all. We look forward to a fruitful, impactful, and solution-oriented deliberation. Thank you, and God bless.
It comes to to welcome us warmly. But just to remind us that Waziri Adio may not give you the impression that he's chopped up many honors in his life. Perhaps we only know that it's a contributing editor and editor at large at these day newspapers, the publisher of Metropole magazine, but he's been special advisor to the President of the Senate. He's been a communications specialist at the UNDP. He was educated at some of the most prestigious schools across the world, among them the University of Lagos, Columbia University, and Harvard University, where he earned a BSc in Mass Communication, an MSc in Journalism, and an MPA in Public Administration, respectively. We thank you very much for welcoming us warmly, Mr. Waziri Adio, our chief host today. Most distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we shall get to meet some of us who are here in a moment. But I realize that in the new administration, we now have some ministries designated creative economy, some blue economy. We still do not have one on green economy. And I think that's part of the advocacy that we may have to push from this meeting today. And that's why I'm particularly glad that one of the supporters of this initiative, the MacArthur Foundation, is ably and capably represented here by the director of the foundation in Nigerian office in Abuja, who is also a co-director of the foundation's On Nigeria project. He has a PhD from the University of Toronto, a master's degree from the Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria, and did his undergraduate degree from the University of Maiduguri. He's taught in renowned universities, including University of Maiduguri, University of Toronto, and Ohio University. That almost sounds like a university that I founded. He has published in several academic journals, including Africa Development and Review of African Political Economy. He sits on the board of several organizations, including the Center for Democracy and Development, CD&D, Joyce Charity and Development Foundation, and the Sir Ahmadu Bello Memorial Foundation, among many others. Please join me as we welcome Dr. Kole Shetima for his opening remarks. Thank you very much, sir.
No, I think this is fine. And thank you for trying to pronounce my name. And Punke also said that you are one of the very few people know how to pronounce her last name. So clearly, this is something that you have been doing very well. I also want to observe the existing protocol and to say that many of you may not be aware, but the vision of the MacArthur Foundation is a just, peaceful, and burdened world. I confess that when I read the word burdened, I have to go to the dictionary to see what burdened means, but it means green world. Our work around the burdened nature of the world is reflected in the work that we do around climate change. That work at the moment primarily focuses on India and the United States. I think we all know, and I don't need to repeat, that climate change, and I know that when we talk about climate change, I think that many of us may not get a sense of what we are talking about. But if you talk to Nigerians, flooding, they know what flooding is. When you talk to Nigerians, failure of crops, they know what that means. When you talk to Nigerians about drought, they know what that means. So I think that as we face climate change and one of the greatest threats to human survival, we know that sea levels are rising, and then that we all know our coastal towns and villages and others are submerging,
Our dry seasons are hotter, wildfires are more intense and long-lasting, floods are destroying livelihoods, and droughts are consuming crops. I was looking at the signature page of one of our directors, and I thought she has a quotation which is worth reminding us. She says, "It blew my mind when someone said, 'Stop thinking about this year as the warmest for the last 100 years, but the coolest one for the next 100 years.'" I thought that was a very apt statement on her signature page. The MacArthur Foundation acknowledges that climate change really does not affect all of us equally. We know that the poor, disadvantaged communities are the ones that are more affected than the affluent communities in our society. We at the MacArthur Foundation, we have a very sense of urgency of the situation. We have worked with many partners in philanthropy and beyond to slow the acceleration of climate change. And I just want to share with you a few examples of what we are trying to do. One of them is, how do we create access to energy for marginalized communities to ensure that energy transition is real for most of them? We are working with other philanthropies in an initiative in the United States, which is called Invest in Our Future, which helps rural, low-income communities with access to $1 trillion in public and private investments towards a clean energy. Beyond grant making, we are also making our own statement. The foundation is on the path of disinvesting $8 billion from fossil fuels and encourage to see how many others can follow us in this regard. We have also allocated $500 million to impact investments, including climate-related investment in such funds as Encourage Solar Finance, which is accelerating the adoption of rooftop solar in India. So our work to support climate change justice are evolving, and our commitment to a burden wall remains core to our mission. I want to thank Agora Policy under the leadership of Waziri for leading the pack on policy development and innovation in our country. And it is true, as Waziri said, for us, Agora Policy was a big bet. It was a difficult decision. When he came trying to convince me why Agora Policy is important about 1.5 years ago or 2 years, I was scratching my head and said, Agora Policy. I said, look, NESG have been making so many recommendations to governments and have not seen much of impact. So why should we support Agora Policy? He said, well, but I read his book and I saw how, because of the research and the policy work that he has done, how that has influenced his own work and why Native became what it became. And so we took the risk, we took the big bet, we invested, and I'm happy to say that it was a good risk. Thank you very much.
Please, let's put our hands together once more for Dr. Kole Shettima. We're indeed honored and happy that you believed in Mr. Waziri Adio and threw your weight behind. Why are you trying to change the climate suddenly? You threw your weight behind what Agora policy is doing with regard to climate change. Thank you very much, sir. We hope that we'll sustain this advocacy by Agora policy as we push for a green economy in Nigeria. At this point, most distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we invite some of our distinguished guests, I should use this? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Please, before we invite some of our very distinguished guests here to share some goodwill messages with us, permit me to recognize the presence of the Executive Director, Women Environmental Program, Ms. Anne-Marie Abagu. Thank you very much, ma'am. Please, what part of the hall are you? The lights are... Thank you. Where are you, please? Oh, no, that's quite a distance. I think there are some seats up here. Could our ushers please lead her up to one of these white sepulchred seats? Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. We also welcome one of our panelists, Senior Officer, Natural Resource Governance Institute, Ms. Tengi George Ikoli. Thank you very much, Tengi. Good to see you again. Thank you. Thank you. Most distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to get the buy-in of some very distinguished personalities in the audience with us this morning, who are also lending their support and their weight and their vision and their verve to the Nigeria Climate Change and Green Economy Initiative. And so I have this special privilege and pleasure to invite from the World Bank, Dr. Shubham Chandrai. Thank you very much, sir, as you present your goodwill message to us all this morning. Thank you very much. Please, let's keep the applause going. The world and the bank, you know, it's a huge one. Sorry, thank you. Sorry. No.
All right. Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Shubham Chaudhary. I'm the World Bank Country Director for Nigeria, based here in Abuja. When Waziri approached me, I think it was about a month or 6 weeks ago, about whether I would be willing to join this event and give this goodwill message, I said absolutely. And I did so for 3 reasons. The first is simply that it was Waziri who was asking. I mean, his role, both at his time at NATI, before as a journalist, but since, in having the vision to start this up, and thank you, Dr. Shatima, and MacArthur Foundation for supporting this initiative, I think has been key in trying to raise just the tenor, the quality, the kind of the impact of the public discourse. Yes, NESG has been there and has been very effective, but when I've worked in every country in Asia, and one thing that did strike me in Nigeria was sort of relatively thin space in terms of think tanks, groups, institutions that try to inform and influence the public discourse. Now, whether or not more information and evidence and analysis will actually translate, now that's the second part. But until you have this first part of having the information, analysis, evidence, it's hard to actually think about influencing policy and political decisions. So that's the second reason I said absolutely. I think this, and the third, reason is simply the topic. Climate resilience, climate change, and then the challenges as well as opportunities that countries face in the face of climate change, as that's emerged as one of the kind of the critical issues in all of development. In fact, for the World Bank here, our program in Nigeria, and I see Drita there, she's one of our team leads on this, climate resilience, helping Nigeria, supporting Nigeria in how best to respond to the reality of climate change is a big part of our program. And I liked especially, the point that's made in the report about, on the one hand, yes, the overwhelming challenge is on the adaptation front. Climate change is going to make life, has already made life more difficult for millions of Nigerians because of rising temperatures, floods, water scarcity, desertification in the north, coastal erosion. So that's a reality. But what I liked is this additional point that, in the climate change world, we talk about that as the adaptation challenge. And then typically we also talk about the mitigation challenge. Well, the fact of the matter is Nigeria, as well as much of sub-Saharan Africa, the mitigation challenge, it's hard to reduce emissions further when you're not emitting that much to begin with, right? What is it? 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions originate from sub-Saharan Africa once you take aside South Africa, okay? But the mitigation challenge, and that's not to say that there isn't a challenge, but the challenge is actually a little bit different from what it might be, say, for an India or an Indonesia or a South Africa, or a China, where we're huge emitters, right? For Nigeria, it's the challenge of how do you promote development in Nigeria, which can only happen with electricity access, okay, with energy. Nigeria's electricity consumption per capita now is what? I think the latest figures I saw, 133 kilowatt hours per year, okay? India is probably Indonesia, we're like at 1,500, China, 6,000, the US, 13,000. There's no way Nigeria can achieve the potential it has, realize kind of the dreams and opportunities that people aspire to without raising this. So there is, and the question then becomes, it's all about energy transition. Okay, how does Nigeria develop, but does so in a way that is consistent or aligned with, or at least with the global trend towards, low carbon and a net zero world. Okay, so that, in a sense, is also an adaptation challenge, and I think that's the point that's made in the report that I like very much, that whether or not Nigeria, is emitting, the thing is, the rest of the world is moving in a direction, and that will pose challenges for Nigeria, and also opportunities, voluntary carbon markets, other things, thinking about, once the EU standards about, the carbon footprint of products, et cetera, come in. Last, let me say that, I hope as part of this discussion today, it's not just about the technical substance, but it's really what, it's about, well, how does that translate into implementation? I hope, I don't know if DG Salisu is still going to be here, but, DG Salisu, the National Climate Change Council has been created. He's the, the Director General, but there needs to be some coordinated action. Okay, right now I see lots of papers. We don't need any more policy documents. We don't need any more, plans, etc., commitments. We need, actually, for Nigeria, all the different actors. I think somebody said, it's all of government, all of economy effort to actually respond to these two challenges. So again, it's great that you're doing this. I'm very here to have been invited to provide this goodwill message. Best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Please, let's keep the applause going for Dr. Chaudhry. And thank you that you believe so much in my friend and brother, Mr. Waziri Adio. because of what he's done in the media and what he has done at NATI. Most distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we take some more goodwill messages, but before then, permit me to recognize the presence of one of our media colleagues, who was once special advisor on media and strategy to President Umar Yar'Adua, Mr. Olusegun Adeniyi. Thank you very much, Mr. Segun Adeniyi. Thank you. He is the chairman of the editorial board of This Day. Thank you for lending support to what we are doing here this morning. May I also recognize the presence of another colleague in the media, Mr. Samiu Okonlawon. Thank you very much, sir. You're most welcome. May I also recognize the presence of the executive director of PLSI. I'll try to find out what PLSI represents later on. Let's welcome Mr. Olusegun Elemo. Please, where are you? Mr. Olusegun Elemo, please. We are printing our necks. The lights are... Where are you, please? What part of the hall are you, or did you japa briefly? Oh, okay. Please step forward. Let's accommodate you at this end here. May also recognize the presence of the Environmental Strategy Policy Advisor at the NNPC Limited, Ms. Zainab Nasser Mohammed. Thank you very much. Please, where are you? No, that's quite a distance. Ushers, could you, as we recognize them, let them occupy this place that we have reserved for them, so that when we have the interactive session later, they can contribute meaningfully to what we are doing here. At this point, permit me, most distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to invite Dr. Tayo Adeloju of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group for his goodwill message. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for teaching us the opposite of Jakpa. We're indeed honored by your presence. Thank you.
Thank you. The chief host, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocols duly observed. My brother Waziri and I spoke about this conceptualization of this project at the onset. And I told him we were in support 100%, that there was no misalignment between the Agura policy, initiative and project and institution and its vision and the NESG. And in fact, he should view our platforms as being available across board to disseminate all its outputs. And the reason is we were clear, and we are clear, that scaling advocacy for policy change and social transformation, socioeconomic transformation, is more than talking to policymakers. It's getting the whole country to shift. And there are many paradigm shifts required to transform Nigeria. They require actors at scale, and we are clear as the NESG that by ourselves, without other think tanks, it simply would have been an impossible journey to go on. So we celebrate you, and we celebrate the MacArthur Foundation Forward and the other partners that have made this journey possible. So, of course, that's why I'm here. I'm here because we do believe not only in all the key outputs you have put out to date, but in this particular one. I think when you look at the report, Shubham's point, the big questions about and adaptation will be discussed extensively, but I want to raise a third challenge of defiance. Our engagement of the political aspirants for president, which was one-on-one and closed, indicated a sense of political defiance that comes, of course, from the climate change paradox. We are not the biggest emitters in the world. We are disproportionately burdened with its effects in Africa and in Nigeria, and there's a sense that to hell with them almost. Let's do what we like and we'll catch up later. But unfortunately, I think the point that Shubham made very aptly, that's not a luxury we can even afford. The fact is that the climate change impacts are here, And any waste of time in not moving collectively at scale will spell doom, not in the long term, but in the short term, because the effects are already damaging from an economic impact point of view. At the NESG, our approach has been twofold. One is to support the building of businesses that think in terms of climate change resilience, but also to start to mobilize private sector to think about it together. A big debate for us a decade ago was the cost of electricity. Based on the fossil fuel model that became characteristic of explaining why renewable energy solutions could not scale. I think we crossed that bridge in 2015, 2016 with the National Survey and Study on the Cost of Electricity, and reached the private sector consensus that renewable energy sources would scale, and they would scale profitably across Nigeria if we prosecuted it in a certain way. Second thing that then happened was that we then ran into the battle of business models. The government's challenge to us was that there were not sufficient business models to show that investments would come in. Again, we jumped on the road with the Renewable Energy Roundtable and then many mini-grid studies in Nigeria. And our studies have shown that renewable energy sources will not only be bankable, they are scalable, they will work, and they will be profitable. Three challenges we pose going into this year's conference is one, whether the business models will arrive in rural economies together to create the sustainable business cases for mini-grids and renewable energy systems to become sustainably fundable and bankable. Two, whether we can restructure the global climate finance architecture to accommodate a better mix of public and private resources in a way that allows us to not simply be behind. I think Africa is behind by $100 billion annually in the funding gap for climate change finance. The last is how we change the narratives at home. This defiance that comes from climate change is not Africa's fault, and is not Nigeria's fault, therefore ignore it, is a very bad narrative, and it's destructive. So this report, we hope, will support that process of removing the defiance, especially as it is felt and conveyed by the ordinary citizen who's going about his business asking, why is climate change my headache? I think that this offers a great opportunity, and I want to thank the marvelous team that put together this world-class report, and wish everyone great deliberations from the NESG. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigeria Economic Summit Group, Dr. Tayo Adeloju. We are indeed honored. Thank you. We'll step out a bit. We are having very cozy relations with the Republic of Germany these days. Thank you. And so we are honored by the presence of the Deputy Head of the German Embassy in Nigeria, Johannes Lerner. Thank you very much. Let's welcome him as he presents his goodwill message.
Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I also would like to join the established protocol, and I'm very grateful to be invited to this very distinguished meeting, which comes at a very good time in order to prepare not only Nigerian energy policy and Nigerian environment policy, but also especially prepare the country for the very difficult discussions which are ahead in the COP28 in Dubai, where Nigeria is one of the main countries which will say, especially what Africa wants to do and has to do in order to achieve climate sustainability, will be challenged by many other countries who are now a country which is sort of a small country which can say, please help me, the development community has to give me all the resources in order to my policy, my energy policy, in order to make it climate sustainable. Nigeria wants to join the G20. Nigeria has been invited to all the major fora in order to advance its points of view and its policy there. Not only the visit of the German Chancellor to Nigeria, but also now the visit of the Nigerian president with a big team of ministers and governors to one of the most important Africa-related economic conferences in Germany. The Compact with Africa was a big step forward, but also more importance and more influence demands more responsibility. And I hope that this very timely meeting where science, policy, finance, and media come together in order to discuss these very important issues will bring Nigeria a big step forward. Therefore, I thank very much the Agora policy and the supporting MacArthur Foundation in order to make this happen, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Lerner. We are indeed honored by your presence. We shall, of course, make other recognitions as we go along. We're effecting a slight structural adjustment on the program that we have before us because we did expect a few distinguished Nigerians to be here with us, those who would help us run with what kinds of policy advocacy we come up with later today after we're done with the program during our panel discussion process on Nigeria climate change and the green economy. But before we do that, permit me to specially recognize a very remarkable human being who earned his bachelor's at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, and then his doctoral degrees from Keele University. He's a leading expert and author on climate change. He's a professor of global climate and environmental governance and the director of the Center for Climate Change and Development at the Alex Ekwueme Federal University, Undufu Alike in Ebonyi State. Before then, he has been teaching and has had fellowship stints at the University of Reading and also at the University of Oxford. He is to present highlights of the report. Please let's all welcome Professor Chukwumerije Okereke. Thank you, sir. You need this? Yes.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please permit me to stand on the already established protocol. But I will be remiss if I don't pay special tribute to Waziri for inviting us to do this report, but also to the General Overseer of Climate Change, Professor Imalo Ladipo, with whom I worked to produce the report. And he retired but not tired, indeed, is a fitting description. And of course, Ms. Ifoma Malo and Fola Aina. I'm standing here on behalf of the four of us to share some of the key highlights of the report. And there are three most important things we wanted to convey in this report, and all of those points have already been made by those who have come here to bring goodwill messages. Number one is that climate change is not a marginal environmental problem out there, but is a major, perhaps the defining socioeconomic, geopolitical, demographic challenge facing Nigeria today. Number two is that how Nigeria will fare in the context of climate change does not depend on what Nigeria do alone. The world is moving on already. Several countries around the world have indicated that they will be winning their economy off fossil fuel. There's a growing call for leave it in the ground, which is gaining traction. The international agreement for climate change has already begun to come very close to phasing down and phasing out fossil fuel. And there are many other indicators of the transition that is happening, which I will share in a moment. So if we choose to bury our head in the sand as ostrich, we will be severely affected. A chaotic transition will do perhaps even more damage than the climate impact that we are experiencing. And the third major point that we will highlight in the report is that whilst climate change may present one of the biggest, if not the biggest, socioeconomic and political challenge facing Nigeria today, it also offers tremendous opportunities for economic resilience, for distributed energy system, for extracting resources from renewable sources to power our economy. Nigeria oil and gas, but Africa as a whole has 40 times more renewable energy resources than fossil fuel resources. And we really need to be thinking about how to extract it. We also make the point that to then transit from talk to action requires a lot of coordination, a lot of institutional building, a lot of capacity building. And I'm glad that the German representative was here because a few days ago, Nigeria signed a $500 million deal with Germany on both gas extraction as well as massive investment in renewable energy, which kind of provides an idea of the way to travel. With those three big points made, let me now run you through the slides very quickly. First slide, please. Global climate emergency is upon us. When, as IPCC scholar, we published this report, we saw that in the last 10 decades, or 10 years rather, the emissions on greenhouse gases across all the sectors have been rising. The latest report that we published a few years ago shows that there is still a huge rise in emissions, greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors, even if the pace has slowed down. But we are still continuing to pump huge amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which is creating unprecedented degree of warming. And many countries around the world have already declared climate emergency. Next slide. It's not showing well. But what we try to show here in the graph is the fact that the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere has been rising since record began on the average, and now stands at a very dangerous level at about 410 parts per million. Next slide. Something is very wrong with our slides today. So the global surface mean temperature has also been increasing. The IPCC finds that we are about 1.1 degrees. Human activities has caused the increase in the average mean temperature to about 1.1 degrees since the industrialization began. if the graph or the slide has been well shown, you will see how we have gone from minus to where we are now. Next slide. So if we continue with the business as usual now, we're going to cross the threshold for 1.5 degrees warming by around 2040. The Paris Agreement makes a commitment to hold the temperature change down to 2 degrees, but to pursue effort to limit global warming average by 1.5. But with the business as usual now, we're going to cross that threshold around 2040. Next slide. I think it was Shetima that said, don't talk about the fact that the last year is the hottest. Talk about that it could well be the coolest for the next 40 years. And this graph shows it. So 21 of the 22 hottest years on record has occurred since 2002. And if Shetima is right, then it means that we are still yet to see more unprecedented temperature increase in the next coming years. Next slide. So this is the mean temperature change for West Africa, and you can see what it's been doing. It's really crazy, really scary, because we often talk about global mean average temperature or mean temperature, but actually the temperature in Africa, and especially West Africa, is higher than the global mean temperature. And so when we talk, even if we manage to hold the temperature down to, say, 2 degrees, you could expect up to 3 degrees warming in Africa because of its proximity to the equator. Next slide. And so the statistics, also the modeling work, show that in Nigeria, we could well experience between 2.7 to 5.7 degrees rise in temperature between now and 2100. And some model, depending on the one you choose, we can arrive at a scary position by as early as 2070. Next slide. So since 2080, the days with dangerously high heat in the sun compared to 2000 has been increasing rapidly. And Nigeria is actually in the hotspot. Nigeria is among the countries that are experiencing the greatest increase in the daily temperature, as you can see in the next slide. Next slide. You see Nigeria, especially Lagos, average increase. The highest, of course, is Miami, but Nigeria comes very close to being the second. And so we talk about this increase in the daily temperature, and the consequence is, of course, that thank you, that's much better now. Good. I think Adio Waziri is noted for quality, and Agora is noted for quality, so it's incredible that this happened, but I think it's been corrected. Okay, so you can see the average increase in the number of days that are considered to be to have dangerous heat in the sun, and Nigeria ranks really high. Next slide. So it's been mentioned in the report, and this is that climate change is already estimated to cost Nigeria about 460 billion cumulatively by 2050, and may well be costing Nigeria about 100 billion, or have cost Nigeria about 100 billion by 2020, according to the figures that we see in a lot of reports, including many of Nigerians' reports. And the World Bank suggests that by, I think in 2006, the World Bank assumed about 2 to 10% GDP loss and about 40% loss in official development assistance, amounting to about 3 billion per annum by 2020 and about 5.5 billion by 2050. So these are huge economic loss attributed to climate change. Next slide. One of the key sectors will be the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector employs about 70% of Nigerians that are engaged in subsistence agriculture, contributing much more than oil to our GDP, between 21 to 24%. And so we see that according to the modeling work that has been done, there will be a reduction in crop yield from between 5% to 50% between now and 2070 and 2080. In some cases, the models estimate up to 50% loss in agricultural yield. Now, if you think about the fact that we have already one of the countries that are ranked are suffering from the highest amount of hunger in the world. The Global Hunger Index ranks Nigeria 103 out of 116 countries. There are about 35 million children that are under the age of 5. 23.5 million of them are suffering from, malnutrition. About, 15% have already stunted growth. And then you can imagine the huge health burden as well as socioeconomic consequences. Now also, with the increase in the hot days that I showed in the previous slides, the post-harvest loss in Nigeria will also increase, because with the increase in the heat, communities around the country will not have, without refrigeration system, will not have where to store their food products. Many of you would know that we're already having about 40% post-harvest loss in some cases in Nigeria, and climate change is bound to increase that. The World Bank also predicts that there will be 25% loss in water available to Nigeria by 2050 unless we take radical action. This will mean far less water for farming, for irrigation, for domestic use, and for industrial use. Next slide. Now, as has been said, I think Shetima, or one of the people that brought a goodwill message, flooding is one of the main ways in which climate change is impacting Nigeria. 25 million people are approximately at the risk of flooding. Many of us know the 22 flooding event, which affected nearly all the states in the country. About 1.5 million people were displaced. About 3.4 million people were affected, and it's estimated that about 600 lives were lost. 2012 flooding event is estimated to have cost about $5.9 billion in direct loss, and about 16.9 billion in indirect loss. This is not an amount of money that Nigeria can afford to be losing when it is struggling to pay its debt. So flooding is a major risk. And flooding also carries, as well as desertification, the risk of increasing malaria burden in Nigeria. Already Nigeria has the highest level of malaria burden in the world, accounting for about 17% of the total. About 68 million cases every year, with about 196,000 deaths. Okay, so the reports available, the projections available indicates that climate change will increase the economic burden to about $1.1 billion by 2050, with an additional 4 million cases due to climate change. Next slide. I've already talked about this slide, so the World Bank's prediction about the drop in water table causing increase in water scarcity, as well as diseases related to dirty water. Next slide. One of the things I said to governments that have my attention is that by 2050, if we do nothing, Nigeria will not exist as we know it, because accelerated sea level rise can result to the loss of about 600 meters of our coastline. Communities will disappear, and infrastructure worth billions will be lost. Some analysis say up to $17.5 billion. And most of this infrastructure will be oil and gas infrastructure that are actually very relevant for our national economic activity. But an estimated 53 million people in the country may need to be relocated at the sea level rise of up 0.5 meters. So it is also a demographical challenge. And remember that desertification is also causing the decrease of the livable areas in the north. And if we then have climate change causing the decrease in the livable areas in the south, We have a huge shrinking of the livable areas in Nigeria with an explosion of population, one of the highest in the world. It's been predicted that we will be one of the top 3 most populous countries in the world by 2100. This now means that we have fewer spaces to live and more people, and that's going to, you can already predict what is going to happen in terms of conflict and over limited resources. Next slide. Next slide. I said that we wanted to emphasize that we cannot wish this problem away, as Waziri said that it's not my portion. Because if we choose to act in a wrong way, we'll be doomed. If we choose not to act, we'll also be doomed because the world is moving on. You can see the number of countries, and this is not exhaustive, that have already indicated that they will phase out fossil fuel in their jurisdiction. Norway is leading the pact and has, of course, Norway has a lot of oil in the sea, but also is one of the countries that have the fastest rate of adoption of electricity vehicle and leading the phase out of fossil fuel vehicles within their cities. So this means that if we continue to invest in oil, most of those infrastructure could well be stranded. Plus, we might be left with nobody to buy our oil. Next slide. And so that's why I say that there is also a risk of transition, okay? And we have calculated the various risks associated with transition, especially of stranded assets, and this runs into hundreds of billions of dollars, whether it's risk associated with stranded assets, but also financial market loss, job loss, and livelihood. So this transition also has to be just, because I think it was Shuban that was saying that we know that climate change doesn't affect everybody equally. This is the same when you talk about between countries, but also it is the same when you talk about within countries. It's usually those who have precarious work, who are poor, who are living in vulnerable communities, in coastlines, etc., that will suffer the most. Next slide. So we have a lot of key commitments that can provide a basis to actually then do something about more focus, a lot more coordinated action. We have the revised NDC, which is adjudged to be very robust. We have the Energy Transition Plan. We have the National Council on Climate Change, the Climate Change Act, which I'm lucky and proud to have contributed a lot to drafting. We have the long-term vision, and I think a few days ago we also launched the long-term strategy, of which I provided the modeling capability for. But beyond this national level commitment, there need to be a lot of action, and that is where we need to be putting more of our emphasis. Next slide. We see from this report that we launched last week, produced by my center, that many states still do not have climate policy. Only about 7 states across the country have concrete climate policy. A lot of action at the policies at the national level, but we need to take it down to the national level. Next, to the subnational level. Next slide. Many states are not appropriating explicitly for climate change in their budget. Next slide. Next slide. And the level of awareness is still very, very low across the country. Okay, so we need to really do a lot to raise the level of awareness, to cascade climate action to the subnational level, but also to move beyond policy drafting to actual implementation in the country. Next level, next slide. So the transition is already at pace. Tayo, I think you spoke a little bit about this. Solar installation, you can see what is done from almost at a zero level in 1980 to a very, very high level in terms of cumulative gigawatt by 2022. Next slide. Same for wind capacity. It has also been increasing dramatically. Next slide. And the cost of electricity per kilowatt is also falling. and now are judged to be more competitive than in some cases than fossil fuel. Next slide. There has been a tremendous growth in passenger EV sales by market share across the world. Next slide. China is leading the pace, but Europe is also following behind. Climate finance is increasing, not as much as it should. There's still a gap in terms of the 100 billion delivered, but actually the other problem is also that we in Africa is not attracting our own fair share of the climate finance. So there is the problem of size, but it's also there's a problem of absorption. So we have a poor absorptive capacity. There is still a limited capacity to write bankable, to design bankable projects and have the institution to attract the money. Next slide. Obi and I have actually calculated that rather than focusing all our energy in public finance, there is quite a lot of money in the institutional investor. And my friend from the Sterling Bank, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for all you do, and you already touched upon this a bit. There's so much money in the institutional investors. Our pension, for example, pension in Africa is what, about 400 billion, right? And so we can be tapping into all different sources of finance in order to tackle this challenge. Next slide. Lithium battery prices is increasing. This is a great opportunity for Africa that have a disproportionate share of the critical minerals that are going to drive the industrialization of the future. But what we are seeing now is that unless Africa as a whole takes action, it is entirely possible to imagine a situation where the extraction of these critical minerals will go exactly the same way that the extraction of fossil fuel has gone. It will be very, very exploitative. The prices that we will sell them will be peanuts compared to what they are worth. The infrastructure will not come. The refining and the added value will happen outside, and then we end up importing the finished products and so becoming even poorer while we are making a transition to the green economy. So you can imagine a war situation where we leave the oil on the ground, we have to import all the batteries, import all the solar panels, and that will drive our fiscal gap even wider. And so it's also important to ensure that we have a regime in place, a deep thinking about how we can ensure that we're extracting value for these critical minerals and that they are being exploited in ways that are sensitive to high standards of ESG. And here at Tengi, in the Natural Resource Government, this is something I'm sure that you'll be looking into. Next slide. So I think this is the second to the last. This is a way of our trying to make the point that climate change is real, but whether it turns to a disaster, a threat, or opportunity for Nigeria will depend on the choices that we make, the collaborations we form, the actions that we take. It's entirely possible to imagine that we can harness this threat and build a sustainable, resilient, green, prosperous world, our nation, or that we fail to act in a concerted way and then we end up really in a very bad shape. So on the last slide, we try to then tease out some of the key recommendations. If the slide is there, can we have it? So key recommendations: strengthen national climate policy framework. We need strengthened institutional capacity. Shuban has made a point. Great, we have the NCCC, but there's still a lot of coordination that's required. We need adequate climate funding and finance, but I always say to people that the amount of rain or water you collect does not always depend on the amount of rain. It depends on where you put your bucket. So it's not just saying we need climate finance. We need to put the infrastructure in place to be able to attract the finance. But this transition has to be fair, otherwise we can run the risk of exacerbating poverty and inequality within Nigeria. But this issue of fairness is also applicable to when we deal with countries like Germany, Europe, and the world. They have historically polluted, and they have stronger capacities, so we should be entering into discussions to ensure that they are supporting us adequately in order to make a fair transition. We need to increase level of awareness and we need collaborative approach, both horizontal and vertical, and involving also the private sector. And then we need targeted sectoral intervention in the energy sector, in the agri sector, in the health sector. We need to be coming together and taking some of the policy statements that we have been writing and design real investment, targeted investment regimes that will allow money to flow with measurable results over a period of time. If you look at the US, for example, they've had this massive Inflation Reduction Act. The EU has gone the way of the EU Green Deal. This is not kind of marginal policies out there. It's now become part of the mainstream economic thinking of these countries. And we need also to take that approach in order to bring the gravitas and the energy and the finance to bear on this problem. Thank you very much. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Please, let's keep the applause going for Professor Chuks Okereke. Thank you for taking us on that tour de force on the report. It's quite a huge report, 64 pages in all, but he has been able, in less than 20 minutes, I think, been able to take us through the high points of the report. Thank you, Professor Chukwumerije Okeke of the Center for Climate Change and Development. We are indeed honored. And while that was going on, two of my sisters joined us here. Lois Auta, thank you very much. Thank you, Lois. And Honorable Kianan Mizir, thank you also for joining along with us at the Nigeria Climate Change and the Green Economy event being put together by Agora Policy. So we heard words: drought, desertification, flood, and flooding. But I don't know where some of my colleagues in the media come with floods. You can count flood. Flooding, coastline, threat to the coastline. I saw a report the other day about Ayetura, I think a community in Ondo State that's almost wiped out. So the threat is real. We should not take some of these things for granted. I'm happy that the Assistant Director, National Council on Climate Change is here with us. Please, let's recognize and welcome Mrs. Asmau Jibril. Thank you very much, ma'am. Please, where are you? Sorry? All right, okay. We recognize other friends who are here and who have come to lend support to what we're doing. Now, I would need, maybe you, I don't know, the guy who helps me with the microphone to help us move this a bit from this point. The NTA man, you also, please help us take care of your microphone, because we want to shift this that way when we bring our panelists up here. Please, who can help join us in doing this, please? So there are issues about communicating climate change. I do not know whether it's the phrase climate change that is difficult, or whether we'll look for some other word that will better communicate it to the people in Nigeria. I had an experience once when we did a program on, well, it was supposed to be something about birth control, right? But we did some research and realized that it would not sit well with a lot of Nigerians, because there was some policy of government to reduce the number of, to work on our population, and in such a way that it resonates positively with the Nigerian people. So if you were talking of birth control, that would have meant that we were saying, oh, don't give birth to as many children as possible when these things are gifts from God. Don't say no when it happens, etc. But we found a way around it after some research, and we called it child spacing, which was traditional to Africa. And that's how we tried to put the messaging out, and then it sat well with people. I'm talking of Babangida in power, about that time, some years back. So we had this child spacing logo with a mother, a son, and 2 kids. We didn't say that you were limiting it to just a family of father, mother, and 2 kids. But because in traditional Africa you do child spacing, you do not give birth to another child until after 2 years, that was how we anchored the messaging. Perhaps is the use of the word climate change. Maybe as we go on, some of us will be able to come up with very catchy phrases that would sell this message better. And that's why I have the very special privilege and pleasure to now invite some of our guests who are here today, who are experts in their own rights on issues of climate change, to help us shed some light on what is going on and how we can take action, not just grammar and plenty of Dogon Turenchi, but to really take action. First, permit me to invite a very distinguished Nigerian who obtained a bachelor's degree in electrical and electronic engineering from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana, with a focus on evidence-driven policy development, effective governance, climate advocacy, and energy access. He brings extensive experience to climate advocacy. He has in fact coordinated 2 significant climate documentaries in Nigeria, one entitled Swallow, Food Security in Nigeria's Changing Climate, and another, Nowhere to Run, Nigeria's Climate Environmental Crisis. He is the director of Public Policy Initiative at the Shehu Musa Yaradua Foundation, and is a civic technologies expert, and is passionate about public policy analysis. Please let's welcome our moderator, Mr. Amara Nwankpa. Thank you, sir. So you take, would you rather this way or right at the center? No, that's fine. Okay, okay, all right. Thank you. Right? Oh, okay, all right. Okay, I hear the names are already indicated on the seats. I trust Waziri Adio. But we also specially welcome another very distinguished Nigerian. No, their names are there, I'm told. So the names have been indicated. Thank you, Paparazzi. Thank you. She is a senior officer at the Natural Resource Governance Institute, where she works on the organization's project Oil Dependency in Nigeria, which aims to imagine a future without oil. Prior to this, she's worked as a program coordinator for the Nigeria National Resource Center, NNRC. In this role, she coordinated the implementation of a set of global best practice principles aimed at promoting better management of Nigeria's natural resources. A member of the Global Council of Publish What You Pay, she holds a joint honors degree in law and economics from the University of Wales and a master's in law, LLM, from the University of Bristol, both in the United Kingdom. Please let's welcome Ms. Tengi George Ikoli. Okay, all right. I think, let me see where we are supposed to be. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Tengi. There's an interesting story about Tengi. She's the great-granddaughter of the great Ernest Ikoli. Please, let's put hand. Those of us in journalism, yeah. Ernest Sisei Ikoli, who launched us onto the path of journalism in Nigeria. So, Simon Kolawole and co, you know what we're talking about? Yeah. We also are very proud and happy to have with us a very distinguished Nigerian. In fact, before Professor Okereke referred to him as the General Overseer of Climate Change. Please, we would welcome him. He has a combined academic work with development practice, having taught in different universities within and outside the country. Prof has picked his bag. And worked in and consulted for the UNDP, the World Bank, the Federal Ministry of Environment, and others. He's a retired lecturer, a leading specialist on sustainable development, environment, and climate change. He has more than 4 decades of research, teaching, and advisory experience under his belt. Professor Emmanuel Oladipo. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Prof. We are also specially honored to have with us Mrs. Barua, who is the Program Officer for Gender, Racial, and Ethnic Justice at the Ford Foundation Office in West Africa. Let's welcome her as she takes a seat up here. She is a public speaker with a focus on gender, public policy, and governance. She has served as Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Women's Trust Fund, a technical and financial resource for women in governance in Nigeria. She earned a bachelor and master's degree in business administration from the University of Abuja and the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. She's also holds a postgraduate certifications in gender, public policy management, corruption, or anti-corruption, as the case may be, governance from the University of East Anglia in York and the University of Success. We welcome you, Mrs. Barua. Thank you. We are honored. With a bachelor's degree in economics, Bachelor of Science degree in economics from the University of Abuja, a master's in major programs management from the University of Oxford, an alumnus of Arthur Anderson, KPMG Nigeria, Wharton School, INSEAD Business School, and completed executive education at Harvard and Said Business School. He is a distinguished Nigerian, accomplished banker, and climate change advocate. He is the current Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Bank. Under his leadership, Sterling Bank actively champions environmental protection through initiatives like Sterling Environmental Makeover, STEM, enhancing corporate social responsibility for the benefit of humanity. Please join me as we welcome Mr. Abubakar Sulaiman. Thank you very much, sir. So the panel will be tackling Nigeria, climate change, and the green economy. The floor is yours, sir. Mr. Amaranwakpa, I hear that you have about 45 to 50 minutes to try to do justice to this, so you know how you allocate time. And so the floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind introduction. And as you're aware, or as he has said, we have only 45 minutes. This is a big topic, and I doubt that 45 minutes will do any justice. But we'll try as much as possible to cover ground. So I'll just go straight into it. And my first question will be to our General Overseer, Professor Oladipo, to set the context for us. And I'm curious about Nigeria's climate agenda, and you obviously having significant experience, especially as a negotiator, on this issue. If you could elaborate on Nigeria's climate agenda and how you see its evolution over the years, and what are the key areas that still need attention?
Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much again. Still good morning, everybody. I didn't know I was going to be a member of this panel, but it's okay. Thank you, Agora and others, for this wonderful opportunity that I've been looking forward to see how some of the ideas that have accumulated over the years could start getting out before I get too old to come out to talk. Nigeria, and what I want to say is actually a bit of a mixed bag. And one of the ways by which we can, as the MC was trying to get us to, for people to understand this thing more, is first of all to recognize that what we are talking about should not be talked about in abstract. If you start talking about climate change in isolation and you don't link it with development, it will not make any sense to anybody. Do you see climate? But do you feel it? So if it's changing, you can only feel it, you cannot see it. It's only the impact that becomes very clear to you. And if we continue to put climate change in the perspective of development, then we'll be able to convince people there's no society that has survived without responding adequately to issues of climate change. Most civilizations that got wiped out, they were wiped out because the climatic conditions became too harsh for people to survive. Briefly, it surprised many people that you get oil in the Middle East and not the rest. And for those that have done geology, they will tell you, how can oil be in a place that is so dry? What does it indicate to you? At one time or the other, what happened there? What happened in those areas? They were not dry. The same system of oil production, oil formation was what took place there. Then the climatic conditions moved away. Remember that the whole of North America was under ice at one time, and the ice melted away, and people started living there. So if you look at all these things, we are not sure what is happening now. But all we know is that the whole world is going through a very serious period of rapid warming that can change the whole climatic conditions for us if we are not careful and if we do not manage it well. But that we can stop it, of course, the answer is no. But can we live with it? The answer is yes. Look at what happened in Somalia 2 days ago. A country that had drought for about 4 or 5 years, all of a sudden complaining about flood. And that's what the climatic system tells you, that occasionally they become very erratic. Humanity has turned the whole climatic conditions into this type of madness that sometimes it will be favorable and other times it will not be. Let's come back to Nigeria, therefore. As a nation, what I want to stress is that the way we have been handling the climatic issues within the development context of Nigeria is more or less the same way we have been handling our total development. Not too sure what to do, not consistent, make a lot of noise. We go for all negotiations, we make statements, the president goes, the ministers goes, everybody goes. Another year will come, series of cycles. We're all preparing to go again to Dubai for the next, I think from November 30 to December 12. And all it will be, we are going to get this, we want to do this. The bottom line is that we have to recognize the following. Climate change is not a totally bad story. All nations, particularly developed nations, are using the response, the need to respond to climate change to bring out innovations. And I think that's what Nigeria is missing. Every time I go for COP meeting, before I stop not going again, new ideas come up, new things now. Electric car is coming, it's not because of, people love to do climate change, but they see the opportunity. Like if you want to reduce emission, we produce electric car. What does that mean? It means that you have to go green. If you want to reduce the greenhouse emission, you don't need this type of Janjati buildings anymore. You have to find energy efficient buildings. So Nigeria needs to sit down and properly now to really remember the opportunities. But I'm pleased to inform, because I work with government too, particularly responsible for many of the policies that have been derived. We have a lot of policies, we have a lot of plans, but we are yet to really put all this into consolidated framework for proper implementation. But with the creation of the National Council on Climate Change, I think Nigeria has started to move in the right direction by having a council chaired by the president, which means the voice for climate change response in this country is now being heard by the first man of the country. And with that, and the probability of having a very comprehensive action plan that will incorporate both the private sector, the civil society organizations, the government, and even development partners next year, there's a good opportunity that we've now be in a position to respond adequately to the impact of climate change on our lives, but also to use that response as an opportunity to develop the economy that will create the type of justice we are looking for, where poverty will not be as it is, food security will not be a major challenge anymore, and we'll be able to really develop our trade in a system that will recognize the need that Nigeria has to take the following steps. What do you do? If the oil is not going to be as effectively utilized as possible because of the tendency of the global move towards this green economy, what do you do with the oil? Do you continue to leave it there? What are the opportunities? What do you do with your gas? And how do you manage your gas system in such a way that you use it to grow your economy, but without really allowing it to destroy all the efforts you are making to reduce greenhouse effect reduction? So we need all this one, but it requires a total comprehensive approach in which all the sectors, the government, the private sector, civil society, development partners, and the people will continue to work together to move the country forward in the era of addressing climate change, but within the development context that we need to develop ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, for that, for setting this context, which is very important for this conversation. My next question will go to Ms. Tengi, Georgie Coley, and the scientific basis of climate change is clear, and I think the evidence is that fossil fuel, the burning of fossil fuels, obviously, what's pushing the planetary boundary that we find ourselves with climate change. And so there's the imperative for a transition from, the use of fossil fuels. And Nigeria obviously is in a unique situation when it comes to that. But there are concerns. There are dynamics around the energy transition, which I would like you to shed a bit more light on it. There's conversation about what is a just transition, and I think that picture is also both at a national level and an international level. So if you could help us a bit just to discuss what the energy transition is, what the global picture is, what the national picture is, and what are the concerns that we should be looking at with respect to the transition. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Amara, and thank you to the organizers. Thanks to Agora Policy for inviting me and providing this platform for NRGI to provide insights from the work that we've been doing up to this point. A lot of conversations have already been had in terms of the effects of climate on the economy and on lives of people, and that is the basis for the just energy transition. From one lens, you look at it from Nigeria, looking externally, and then also looking inward. I'll start from the external perspective. A lot of conversation has been had today about the climate impacts and contributions by sub-Saharan Africa, being 4%, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions globally. And when conversations are had, it tends to stop there. And that comment, has been referenced by both Tayo from NESG and I believe Shetima as well, in that we're focused on that aspect, but then we don't look as closely at the impacts of that transition on our lives and our economy. The presentation that was made by Chuks earlier on spoke to that slide that showed the different countries that are shifting their energy systems away from fossil fuels. You had, looking specifically at India, Spain, the US, France, and China. China said in the near future, but you have other countries that are more specific about 2040. The reason I mentioned those 5 countries are that they are our trade partners for our oil. And if they're shifting away, there is likely going to be an impact. And so that gap, the financial gap, the economic gap, that has to be bridged by Nigeria. And so the question is, how do we do that in a way that's sustainable? Nigeria requires technology, it requires finances, it requires technical capacity and human resource development to be able to shift from fossil fuels to renewables. And that requires a lot of infrastructure, a lot of development and understanding of that value chain. And because of that disparity, there is then a requirement to engage with the international community to say, even though we haven't suffered as much impact, we are willing and committed to transition, but what sort of supports can be given to these countries that have been affected by the impacts of climate change, but have contributed the least? So that is more the conversation. There have been commitments for loss and damage. There have been commitments of $100 billion that has not really come to Nigeria, and to sub-Saharan Africa effectively. But what Nigeria can do is negotiate more specifically in terms of what we need. When we have these sort of conversations is we stop at, okay, you've impacted us in this way, and that's where we end it. But if we provide opportunities in terms of, okay, we have options to expand our renewable sector, we need funding for these specific opportunities around wind and solar, create a plan that these institutions, international community can actually key into. That is something that can then take the conversation further and can start to help us to achieve our development goals, and not stopping at the conversation around these are impacts that we tend to suffer. So developing bankable projects. We saw South Africa, I believe it was at COP27, providing very, very concrete examples of projects that would transition their economy from coal to decarbonize, to incorporate renewables into their energy systems. And there was a lot of funding and commitments that went into there. At that same COP, Nigeria launched its energy transition plan, set its net zero goals, ambitions, but we have not seen a looking at Nigeria and looking at Nigerians. So if we're looking at just energy transition within Nigeria, this is saying that there's an impact that is going to be felt by people in Nigeria. One example that NRGI has looked at is the oil dependencies of the subnational governments. You have a state like mine that depends on revenues from oil, which is Bayelsa State, to about 90%. What happens to a state like mine when the demand for fossil fuel reduces and the revenues that are relied on, the pipeline stops? What do we do? What plans are being made to transition? How prepared are those subnational governments even to address the impacts of climate change? Do they have any transition plans? Chuks initially talked about a climate change plan, but there are also looking at energy-specific transition plans as well that have to be focused on. And that mapping has to be done, and concrete steps need to be taken. You have also the environmental impacts of the transition on those who are located in those communities as well. All of these things are not new. They've been experienced up until this point, but climate change presents an urgency, an immediate action that needs to be taken to ensure that these impacts are remediated. You have international oil companies leaving in their droves and divesting their interests. What sort of plans are being put in place to ensure that the legacy issues, the legacy spills, the degradation is being remediated? Who is discussing that? As the government is engaging in transferring those assets, do we have guiding principles? Do we have regulations that dictate how that whole phase out is going to happen. You have the NOCs taking over, but are they also taking over the legacy assets? Do they have the capacity to even address those? So that conversation is not necessarily being considered. The other element around just energy transition locally, so from a Nigerian standpoint, is as we're making these grand deals plans at the national level, the energy transition plan, the NDCs in response, are we also integrating that with our development plans? Are we also bringing that down to the grassroots, to the subnational levels as well, to make sure that they are also incorporating this? Let me take this even further down to the grassroots. You have the woman who is used to cooking her jollof rice, with kerosene. It doesn't taste the same without that. And you have a plan for her to shift to clean cooking. But does she know what's going on? Have you spoken to her? Have you communicated? So that's where stakeholder awareness is very, very important, to engage with those who we actually aim to change their mindsets and change their lives. We're making decisions without involving them in that process. And that takes me to another element of just energy transition, which is around social exclusion, which is going on. But we have to make sure that it's an inclusive process, it's a consultative process, so that every decision that is being made, those who are being impacted, those who are envisioned to take that action and change their mindset and change their lives and their systems of working, actually see themselves in these processes. And we engage with them in the language that they can understand. And they can understand their own system, their own local and cultural systems that can be integrated as well, to be able to make these changes, to ensure that we are able to get a sustainable transition. Otherwise, it will hit a certain level and it will stop. It will not dovetail to the whole of Nigeria, and we will not meet those lofty targets that we have set for ourselves for net zero for 2060, an ambition to transition long-term strategy for 2050, if we don't ensure that as we're thinking about the transition, we're being very inclusive, we're being very collaborative, we're being very collaborative and consultative in the process. So just to summarize and bring it back home, I have talked about a Nigeria looking outwards and then a Nigeria looking inwards. If we want to make sure that we have a just energy transition, we have to marry all of those different perspectives and think about it more holistically, be comprehensive in our approach, and ensure that we have a roadmap that we're looking to mark off all these milestones as we're moving forward. We have all of these plans, but there are no concrete steps to let us know when we're making progress, when we need to adjust, and when we need to refine our movements as well. And to be able to be sustainable, we need to make sure that we do those things, put those things in place. Thank you.
Please, a better round of applause. I'd like evidence that the audience is engaged with the panel. Thank you, Tengi, for that. My next question is to Mr. Abubakar Suleiman. I think if the race towards energy transition was a marathon, Sterling Bank would be one of the leaders, the pace setters, as it were, in that kind of scenario. We see that you've kind of been drinking your own Kool-Aid as a bank in terms of transitioning the way you work to be more green and more sustainable. So I'm going to ask you a double-barreled question. The first, obviously, is what's motivating what you're doing, and and what's driving this transition that you are implementing in the bank. But you also represent an industry that is a big defaulter in this scenario when it comes to financing fossil fuels. Since the Paris Agreement, we've learned that the major banks have put in $4 trillion into fossil fuel exploration or exploitation. And so the second aspect of my question is, what's your vision for climate financing in Nigeria? How do you see that picture changing within Nigeria's context to finance or to provide financing for a greener economy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me at Agora Policy. I don't know where to start this except to go back to the beginning to say there is a difference between a climate intervention, climate advocacy, climate policy, and a green economy. My approach is to start from the perspective of the economy, to ask the simple question, is there a viable opportunity for people to improve their quality of lives by intervening in the spaces that we have intervened? In other words, can my intervention lead to economic output? Can it lead to job? Can it lead to profit? Because at the end of the day, when we say we need to advocate, the one language that everybody understands is their own bottom line. So we must find a way to bring the conversation down to what is the bottom line of the average citizen. A couple of examples will do. I think the beauty with the work I have to do here is I don't have to go through any complex policy. I'm just going to talk about things that I'm doing. I would take the issue of how we advocate. Obviously, people think of advocacy and they think of government, you know. Get on a platform somewhere and tell the government what it needs to hear. Well, that is useful, and obviously government have been known to listen. But there's also advocacy where you sit in the room with people in government offices and you try to demonstrate that there's a better way. And I know a lot of us do that. But I think when it comes to advocacy, the most important one is to look at the population itself and to demonstrate to the population that they are better off doing things in a certain way. The biggest project that we've done is we took corporate head office on Marina. It's a building that is well over 30 years old, and we wanted to do a renewal. And what we did was to rethink the building, change the design, change the cooling system, and wrap the entire building up in solar panels, making it the first high-rise building in Africa that will be powered from the sun. But the question is, why did we do it? Because, again, people ask the question, does it make sense? Are you going to make money? Well, the first secret is that I had to present a commercial justification for that. And at that time, when diesel price was around 200 plus 300, it was a viable commercial justification. It was a risky project. It hadn't been done before. It was technologically complex, but it was commercially viable. So the first point was that it has to be viable. The second point was that it is not just the energy that you're going to deliver from that that is the return you get. It is the fact that we now sit in our offices and every corporate that is interested in energy transition is coming to us to say, how can we work with you? Think of that as I could have spent that amount of money doing CNN advert telling people that I can give you solar solution, but instead I put it out there for you to see. The final point is, and again, just speaking about the specific advocacy, this is me advocating to the commercial community. I found out that I'm actually able to attract certain quality of people to work for the institution because of this decision. People whose hearts are in the green economy, but who would normally have avoided working for a commercial bank, suddenly see an opportunity to be able to create economic value while at the same time doing something they care about. So that is kind of the thinking. I move away from there and go to one or two other projects we've done and talk through the why. Because people talk about implementation of the climate agenda as if it is one large big bang. You know, the government comes together and we do something. No. It is going to be millions of small, tiny actions carried out by everyday people. The second experience I'd like to share was there is a cooperative of women in Kano State who were looking for a way to advance their economic interest. Part of the problem, of course, that you would face if you're in Kano State is, for instance, that you may actually have limited mobility if you're a woman in a certain part of the state. The fact that you may not want to jump into a vehicle with a man, you're going somewhere else, something nobody talks about. What we've done, working with a partner, is to say, why don't we bring in EV tricycles on one side, but because the price will be so expensive relative to IC or internal combustion, let's remove the battery from it so that they can afford to own the tricycle without the battery. And then let's fund a separate program where we use solar panels to charge the batteries. And all they have to do is in the morning you go there, drop the exhausted battery, pick a new one as if you are paying for fuel, and go on your day. Now, what we've done is to give those women an opportunity that they never had before, right? The ability to control their own mobility, to give them an opportunity to own assets, right? To own assets. But we've also created a new filling station. Someone is running a project somewhere where throughout the day, he collects energy from the sun, and he gives it out the next morning to people who then run transport system. So I guess my argument is that if solving the problem, if we make it profitable, if we make it a venture that improves the quality of lives of people, then we have less job to do. The other point is, and this is something that ties into the issue of climate finance, for it to be profitable, you have to be financing the ecosystem. If I took $1 million today and I imported panels from China and I put it out there, it's very different from if we invested money in panels that have been produced somewhere in Kaduna State and distributed. The economic impact is so different that it is possible to create the reward system to make it profitable. But if all I'm going to do is to take dollar from the reserve, import the panels from somewhere, and then put it out there, that does not create sufficient economic return, even for government to be able to put back. So we need to think about the reason why China can invest so much money in alternative energy, in renewable energy. It's that every kobo they spend actually leads to economic growth. It leads to job creation. So if we're thinking about the policy and we're just thinking about if you transform the sources of the energy alone without domesticating the economic opportunities, then you have not solved the problem. First and foremost, you cannot fund it sustainably. And before I address directly why banks have not been successful in financing climate finance, part of it is because what you see, for instance, as a petrol subsidy is actually a renewable energy tax. A petrol subsidy is not necessarily a petrol subsidy. It is a tax on other sources of energy that don't enjoy that subsidy. If we were given the same subsidy that we had with petrol for solar, rooftop solar, we would have gone through the roof with the amount of installation. So sometimes we need to understand why we are actually acting against our best interest when we think we're helping the people. When we saw the removal of the petrol subsidy, the initial effort at it, there was a significant demand for rooftop solar across the country. It's something we've said forever. It's not about the financing cost. It's about the economics of it. And sometimes the economics of it is more about what happens before financing. Because a lot of the energy assets we have are not financed by banks. There's a significant amount of energy assets that are either equity financed or they are consumer financed. But you can't do that if the economics is not right. So coming back to it, the funding exists, but the economy, the green economy that we referenced earlier needs to happen so that you can fund it and have first and foremost, the total return to the economy is much higher. Secondly, even as a banker, you are able to finance every segment of that value chain so that your funding cost goes down and you can then lend cheaper. But right now, that is not what is happening. I guess summary of it is this. We do it because we think it makes good economic sense. And where it doesn't yet make economic sense, we pursue the advocacy that would enable that so that it becomes a profitable venture, so that it's not just about doing good. I think it's about doing well. I don't think you can fund the energy deficit we have by trying to do good. You have to do it by making sure that through policies, through taxation, through tariffs, you create a system that makes the green energy a more viable option, or at least a competitive option to alternative. If we do that, then you won't have to beg the financial institution to fund it.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think Funke here is saying, let's just close the panel. Just the quality of that response, but it shows someone who's actually practically out there doing these things. And just to add a little bit to what he said, I think it's the integrated energy planning tool from the last administration that highlighted that the cost, if you were to, the affordability gap, if we were to close it for solar home systems, it will be $1.3 billion, which is a fraction of what we spend on fuel subsidies. And if we were to close the affordability gap for mini grids, that's $628 million, which is still also a fraction of what we spend on fossil fuel subsidies. So thank you very much for that, your answer. Now I go to Mrs. Barua, and we've talked about, climate change is also a social problem. It's a social issue. And as we transition, even right now, before transition, you find that the burden of climate change is disproportionately borne across the population. And it's interesting because, there's an intersection of gender and climate. In fact, it's already evident in this conversation we're having. I think it was Tengi that talked about the woman making jollof rice and, from firewood and so on. I would like you to talk a bit more about that intersection. And for us to hear from you about, first of all, accounting very well for that disproportionate cost, but also how do we avoid replicating this disproportionate cost and the disproportionate benefit in the green economy?
Thank you, Amara. I thought we were closing the panel after that. How do I top that? But thank you. I would like to start by saying, I think the other panelists have laid the basis for this conversation very well. And we know in the global south, of course, that natural resources, metals, minerals, forests, fossil fuels, or whatever we're looking at is causing severe environmental damage and social harm. I think someone here mentioned earlier that perhaps we need to find a different nomenclature for the word climate change, and that maybe then it will make more sense to policymakers and to the ordinary Nigerian, particularly to those in indigenous and rural communities, to really understand what risk we're dealing with. And added to that, we have a very weak governance system with a lot of corruption, which means that a lot of the revenue we get from even the extraction, exploitation of these resources are disproportionately beneficial only to those who invest in it, but not from the communities where this is explored or extracted. And we're very, extractivism is the height of what we do in the country. We just keep taking and taking from the communities, without a commensurate beneficial effect on those who reside in those environments. So, and at the end of the day, we find that it's now a battle of might. It's a battle of will. It's those who have access. It's those who have the resources. It's those who have connections, meaning that the most vulnerable in society would always be disproportionately affected, and they would be more affected, particularly women and girls, persons with disability, and those at the margins of society who don't have access to the kind of conversations we have or to the kind of resources that we have. So, but we're not thinking about them. When push comes to shove, it is the woman, it is the girl, and it is the vulnerable these are the people who are going to suffer more. Because whether we have solar panels on our roofs or, we're using electric cars, there are people who will not be able to move. We're not even thinking about how those who have to go miles and miles to fetch water, what's going to happen. I saw on one of the slides that Mr. Chooks had shown us how deep the woman with a baby on her back and her daughter had to go in. The environmental and health hazards to that woman and the child going that deep into the dry well, because they were basically just scooping water from the ground. And so we need to begin to have that conversation. So to your question, Amara, yes, those at the margins of society are going to be the most hit, and it is our responsibility to actually begin to make them understand and break it down, like you eloquently said, to break it down into a language that they understand so that they're with us on, because there are more of them than there are of us. And we make all the policies, we make all the decisions on their behalf, and they don't understand what climate change is. What does climate change mean to the woman cooking jollof rice? But she's going to feel that impact when she's no longer able to sustain that livelihood for herself and her family. And for persons with disabilities, for instance, you know, we're still even struggling with access. We even here, we're struggling with just basic access, you know, even to things that are widespread, let alone when we have the full effect of climate change on us. Making economic sense for me is something I'm going to take from this conversation, because perhaps when things are converted to zeros and other numbers, we find policymakers more interested in it. So maybe we begin to speak in such a way that we're talking about numbers, the gaps, the impact, the economic cost, the economic value, and I'm really blown away with some of the numbers around even what we call fuel subsidy. It's a sham and it's a scam. And understanding that and breaking that down is, I mean, good luck to us if you're going to be telling the average Nigerian that it would be better to subsidize rooftop solar panels. You know, they would probably think this is an elitist strategy to deny us fuel. But difficult as it may seem, it's the right way to go, and it's the only thing we can do to really ensure that those at the margins of society really understand what we're talking about and can get with the program. And the earlier we do that, the better. At the Ford Foundation, for instance, one of the things we're doing is, you know, working with communities, you know, that where extraction and all this is taking place, to ensure that we build work on community voice and accountability, and we also make sure that institutions, organizations who work in those places are held accountable, you know, in terms of corporate and institutional accountability, while we push forward with the just, and I learned today, not just, but also fair energy transition. In the areas where all these are happening, we still have many people who are jaded, who don't feel that this is important yet, who feel that this is millions or thousands of years away before we become like the dinosaurs. But some of the numbers that we have seen today clearly shows that we are sitting on a time bomb, and it's going to be closer, and it's even here right now as we speak. So Amara, I really think that inequality is like a wound that festers. And in a way, every time that we talk about a national issue, a governance issue, the gap continues to widen, because we continue to put the needs of those who can't sit on the same platforms and the tables that we share at the backdrop. And because we don't bring their values, we don't bring their opinions to the table, we don't hear from them. How do we think that those you know, at the margins of society would like, for instance, to address climate change? Have we thought about that? You know, we may have the decisions from the COP27 and our plans for COP28, but what will the average person in rural communities, in indigenous communities, what will their solutions be like? What will their solutions look like for climate change? What would work for them? And not just what would work for us at that level. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Funke, for that. We have 10 minutes to the end of this panel. I think we're still going to be here for the interventions as well, I guess. And I really want to appreciate the panel for the management of time. I'm just going to give us each an opportunity to do like a call to action, and then we'll move to the next section of this. And I'm going to sort of encourage us to address the call to action to specific areas. So the first to Professor Oladipo, you know, I think you've highlighted an enforcement gap. We have very good policies on paper. There's a gap between what we have on paper and what we can actually find on ground. So I would like your call to action to focus on how do we close this gap.
Thank you very much. I think the beauty of this discussion today, rather than talking about this gap, I would really want to use the opportunity for us to think through something very important. What is missing in Nigeria is a very, very serious gap, is the interface between research and policy. A lot of our policies in this country are not guided by very good research information. And every potential leader in this country seems to be an expert. And I think that to me, well, I've never had anybody say we invited this group of people to give us an idea of what this policy will be. You just see our policy is already there and it is done. This type of discourse that we're having today is the one that a document like this, how do we use it to really influence the policy of this country? I think that's a major area that we can look at. I don't know how we can do it, but if Agora has any connection one and do, using development partners and others to really influence policy decisions based on evidence-based research work, I think that's very important. In the case of Nigeria, I'm not too sure whether it's going to be a very simple solution. And in fact, from what Mr. Suleiman said, I'm coming to your head office because I use solar in my house and it's 24 hours. And before I leave, let me just give you an example. I used to buy diesel of about 120 liters. I'm a very small person, I don't have much money. 120 liters a month. Until about 3 years ago when I installed a 5 kVA, kVA, that carries 2 freezers, all my fans, and I don't use AC because I'm old now. I don't like too much cold air in my chest. So all I do is, I use to pump water because the government doesn't provide anything anymore. So I pump my water, I do everything, and then by 6 o'clock I switch off all the 2 freezers and I have light throughout the whole year. Whether there's NEPA or not, I don't even remember. It's only when people stop coming to charge phone in my house, then I know there's NEPA. But every day, including the security people, and I do the calculation. Last year, I bought 60 liters on March 7. No, this year, sorry, March 7. 60 liters, because I need to keep my generator. Occasionally, when it is very rainy, you may have to really charge the inverter for about an hour or 2 maximum to restore it, so I can use it at night. And I used the 60 liters from March 7 till October this year. And the beauty of it is that it calms me down. I don't have blood pressure of shouting at where is the diesel? Why didn't you tell me this is finished? Now that I'm here, it's my wife alone in there. I've not received any call that there's no light. All these things. When you look at all the benefits, so one of the things we can try to do is what the Sterling Bank has done. The government has to be serious about these things. Don't let us, as I said, don't let us look at as if climate change, we are being forced to respond to it. No, it is the only way, by responding to it positively, exploring all the opportunities, is the only way we can develop. If an average governor and the federal government says, okay, every civil servant that has about 5 years to go in the civil service, they are going to be a sort of like we used to get car loan in those days. When you have your first degree, the 3rd day you start work, there's a car loan of 4,800 naira for you. Everybody. And when you get that, you pay over a period of time, maybe about 50 naira, that you don't even know you are paying any loan. Such a thing is what we need. Let the government be serious about this thing, that if you can more or less power the households now with the solar, the amount of energy they need can now be diverted into the industrial sector, without which this country will never develop. There's no need deceiving ourselves. All these service industries will never make this nation to develop. We need the industries to move. And the only way you can move the industries is to have the power. But if you take the households a little bit up and divert that up, that's the way we can start, by practical demonstration that the government can be considered. The private sector have to help, of course, but you have to take a lot of risk. But I don't think the risk is too much. Once government can guarantee them, I think you'll be able to help so it's practical demonstration. Without that, policy or no policy, we still continue to roam around. Thank you very much.
Round of applause. Closing that enforcement gap is sometimes self-enforcement, embracing the change ourselves. And I'm sure Prof, when he sees the sun shining, he's very, very happy. So Tengi, your own call to action, and your issue has always been about, energy and natural resources. And you asked an important question, what do we do with the oil? And I think this is something that you need to center your call to action. How do we balance energy security, revenue for government, addressing energy poverty, and also avoiding this cliff, because I see it as a cliff, where our biggest partners move away from using fossil fuel, but we are stuck in an economy that is dependent on their patronage.
Thank you for that question, Amara. Yeah, it's a very important question, and I think the way we look at it is, as we're shifting from oil, so phasing out oil and phasing into renewables, it is very important to us for Energite, for that mapping of that transition to be done and to be made very clear. We've had different challenges, governance challenges around the way we manage our oil, and it's important not to repeat those same mistakes as we're looking at our renewables. But we find that we can tend to be a bit reactive, and it's when we see the challenges unfold that we start to address them. But we've been privy to the governance, environmental, the social challenges that we've seen in the oil sector, and it's important to ensure that we ramp up remediation and resolution of those outstanding issues, and prepare a framework that addresses what we could find with renewables, for instance. One of the points that I'd like to make is, and I think that was made earlier on, but to reinforce that point, that we found issues with exploiting our oil and having to import refined crude. And to avoid that same system, it's important to create a strong infrastructure and a renewables value chain sector as well, to be able to ensure that we don't have to then depend on the international community for our solar PVs, for our wind turbines, etc., when we want to build a system where we have a strong domestic energy system that reinforces our energy security in the long term. And it's now that we made those sort of plans, it's now that we made those sort of investments, it is now that we start to create frameworks around our transition minerals to ensure that we're building systems that do not just focus on extraction, as we've done up to this point, but focus on value addition within the Nigerian space. Again, preserving our future and thinking about what that might mean for us. And as we're doing that, it's also important to ensure that we take a people-centered approach in looking at the impact on the lives and livelihoods of the most vulnerable groups, which I mentioned earlier on, and making sure that we're mapping the transition risks in terms of loss of government revenues at the national and subnational levels, and making sure that as the government is developing these plans, that we as people, all of us in this room, and those of us that are development partners, private sector, are engaging the government to make sure that the plans that are making are actually fit for purpose, and can actually ensure that we attain that sustainable development. What we tend to find is we are one step removed from all of these processes, and when there's a more advanced stage, then there tend to be challenges and disruptions and grievances in terms of how these things are developed. So in terms of in the civic space, and those of us that are civic actors, it's important to hold that responsibility for ourselves to make sure that we're engaging in developing information and data and evidence that would help to shape an inclusive, sustainable, and potentially just energy transition, and that we engage the process with the government and try to make sure that as we're moving forward, that we're all doing it in a collective approach, to not repeat the same mistakes, as I've said, that we found in the oil and the oil sector. And I think that's a conversation that we're not really having. Because we're taking it for granted that we're at this phase, but not really projecting what the future could look like. And that tends to be a challenge that we found in Nigeria. So I'm hopeful that from these interventions that we're taking the issues that we have found that we discussed today on this panel to be more immediate and more urgent, and making our interventions to be responsive to achieve this sustainable energy future that we all want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Tengi. Mr. Suleiman, 1 man's subsidy is another man's tax. I think that's one point you made the last time you spoke. And I think highlighted in your intervention was the discord between, or the discordant tunes between what government is doing and what sometimes even the noble climate agenda for private sector is. How can we, and this is your call to action, foster a collaborative approach, something that shows that both the financial sector, private sector, and government are singing from the same hymn sheet?
Okay, thank you. So first, let me go back to your original question, which is financial institutions are still funding fossil fuel. We need to think of our natural resources today as a form of capital. And it is the only alternative capital to foreign capital, which at this point is in a hostage situation, where we know very clearly that we can only deploy it in a way that is consistent with what the owners of capital insist on. So we should exploit our natural resources, but think of it as the way to fund the future economy. The day we start to think of whatever revenue comes from oil as a way to start to build an alternative energy ecosystem, then we'll start to make progress. So that's something both government and financing people need to understand. Because right now, if we keep funding the oil and gas industry and none of that revenue is being redirected into creating cleaner energy, then we're losing our both ways, right? I think that when it comes to finding that relationship between government and financial institutions or the private sector, government needs to understand the levers that they control. They control a lot of levers that can change behavior, both at the financing level but at the consumer level as well. And they're not pulling those levers. I'll give you an example. If you want to bring in an EV vehicle today, there is still got, I think, almost 50% tariff, I don't remember. If you have a semi-knockdown, it still has about 30% tariff. My point is that those are government levers that can change behavior, and we are responding to those behavior whenever we pick up a government policy. Same way I've spoken about the subsidy and the levers it controls. We are also facing a situation where there is no effort today to create a green ecosystem. So people say maybe we cannot compete in manufacturing solar panels, and maybe that is true in the short term. But there are other components of the energy systems that we can compete in. But there is no deliberate effort to enable that ecosystem, right? So government needs to first understand its levers and needs to pull them aggressively. On the side of the private sector, both the commercials and the consumers, there's a lot of ignorance. Far too many people do not realize a real competitive position of alternative energy today. And that in fact, if we focus on letting people see how they're actually better served, then we don't really have to have a debate. A couple of weeks ago, we went to launch at the Bonri market, a market that we've started to provide solar for. And there were people there who said that the amount of money they were spending buying diesel or petrol so that they can work for 6 to 8 hours a day was more than what they now have to pay to have 24 hours access to clean energy to do their work. That situation was a pure situation of they didn't know any better. So there has to be a lot of focus on the consumer, because the consumer also has latent power. They can affect the things that we do. Most people have been on solar for just under 20 years. Just under 20 years. I started to experiment with solar about 17 years ago. And every year I have watched the unit price of solar come down every single year. And finally, just to speak to how government policies is effectively preventing change, A couple of months ago, it became clear that if you use LPG to power your car, your sedan, or your truck, you're actually saving roughly 40 to 50% of the cost compared to the new price of petrol. And the number is that, oh, okay, if it is this and that's the market price that is not subsidized, and subsidy is likely to be removed completely, it makes sense, and people started to invest. But if you don't have a supply system that guarantees that you're going to have LPG, let's not even talk about CNG. So government needs to activate the demand, and that demand will activate the businesses and the entrepreneurs and the financing. Because right now, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest challenge from financing renewable energy for me is demand. It's not even all the other issues. And demand is as a result of ignorance. So I would ask that government focus on letting people understand that there are better ways than burning firewood.
A round of applause, please. So Funke, you get your wish. You get to close the panel. And there's an aspect of this climate, green economy, climate response that we don't often talk about. The green economy is still an extractive economy. We are just changing what we're extracting. And so there is still the risk that we are going to externalize some of the social costs of extraction like we did with fossil fuels. I mean, if you think about the Niger Delta at the moment and what's happening with the environment, and the critical raw materials that are considered critical to the green economy that are also found in Nigeria, in several places in Nigeria. So what should be our collective responsibility to extractive communities and to, in fact, the extractive sector when we are thinking about the green transition in Nigeria? I think that would be your call to action.
Thank you, Amara. I think the first place to start is to learn from what has happened with fossil fuel and to use that learning, if those who implement policy are listening, to use that learning as we begin the green energy, green economy transition, because if we don't learn from that, it will probably be worse off in another 50 or 100 years, depending on who is still here at that time. But whether we're documenting all that has happened with fossil fuel and carbon and all the bad energy that we're using right now, and use that learning as we approach green energy. What were the mistakes? What were the gaps? How can we avoid those gaps and those mistakes as we transition to green energy? And perhaps make it more consultative, because right now the conversation is so elevated that many of those who are going to suffer from the effects of this don't even understand what we're talking about. Even I sometimes struggle with some of the terminologies and understanding what the implications are for me as a person. And for my call to action, it would be that the only asset that the poor and the vulnerable have is the environment. We say this popular joke, let the poor breathe. They basically just breathe right now. And for the first time, even that, their survival is being threatened by climate change. We're not even sure if we'll be able to breathe in or if we're currently breathing in clean air. And so for me, climate change is not theoretical. It impacts the poor, it will impact the rich. The rich probably have opportunity to mitigate that, maybe fly to the moon or move to another planet. But the poor and the most vulnerable, even more. And thus we have to deal with the issue of adaptation and the mitigation with a collective and inclusive approach. That's what we missed with fossil fuel. We shouldn't miss that with the just and fair energy transition. So we urgently need that shift to move from rhetoric to action by making access to green energy widely accessible. It's not accessible. First is it's the accessibility and it's the understanding of what needs to be done. Policymakers need to break down this and have policies that actually help us engage with the process better, and for everyone. The same way we do with laws and policies, we break it down. We say simplification of the VAP laws, simplification of the gender policy, simplification of the electoral law. We need to have that simplification of our, of our just energy policies across the country. Until and when we do that, we'll continue to struggle with that collective action, and we'll meet collective resistance, because those who are most affected will not understand what we're talking about. Thank you.
A round of applause, please. I think one more thing is not to repeat the mistake of treating what's on the ground as something that government will fiscalize and sell and convert to government revenue, but as something that is to be used for the good of society to drive sustainable behavior. Please, another round of applause for the panel. So it's time for special interventions, and the first special intervention I would invite is Ms. Annie Marie Abago. Ms. Annie Marie Abago, please, the podium is yours for your special intervention. Thank you.
All right. Permit me to observe all protocols. Thank you so much, the panelists, for such an insightful conversation. I just wanted to give just one point, and this has most to do with the community, the grassroots. So there is an intervention that we conducted at a small community in Benue, and we called it the Solar Dryer Tent. Now, the Solar Dryer Tent is not complicated at all. It's very cost effective, and the materials can be gotten at the community. It's a small house built with very little concrete. The concrete is the red sand to form blocks, and is covered in leather. Now, this house has air vents that traps heat. This solar dryer tent was brought up as a result of the farmers at this community. They predominantly grow tomatoes and pepper at this community, and they've had issues of whenever they take their products to the market, when they are not able to sell them, they have to throw them away. So hence they lose money, and at the end of the day, they don't really make a lot of gain. So we came up with this solar dryer tent from one of our partners in Malaysia. And this solar dryer tent has helped them because at the end of the day, when they cannot sell, they can dry their tomatoes and pepper in this solar dryer tent. And that has helped them immensely. And because of the success of this tent, we have been able to replicate in other communities, which we're still currently doing. I brought up this initiative because there are very simplified solutions at the community level. The local people, they do have these solutions. They just need our help to amplify these solutions. So just like, sorry, I can't remember your name. Funke, yes. Like she said, we should stop playing football and actually come up with actions that are very simplified and effective. Thank you.
Round of applause. Ms. Annie Marie Abago is from the Women Empowerment Program, and that project focuses on ensuring that women also get some of the benefits or the opportunities of climate transition. The next person is Dr. Akin Yuga. Dr. Akin Yuga, please.
Good afternoon, all protocols observed. I'd like to thank Mr. Waziri Adio for inviting me here and also for inviting me to make some inputs into the report. Thank you very much, sir. And I would like to also thank the panel, very distinguished panel. Thank you for your contributions. I'd like to note just two things. For us to make quick progress in Nigeria, and of course, indeed of all of Africa, we need to think of scale and speed. Scale in terms of this, the rapidity at which some of these solutions can be deployed, not just at the national level, but also at the subnational level, and of course at the very local level. The issue we've had in Nigeria, like Prof also highlighted, we have some of these policies that may not have been so grounded in research in some places, and some are, some are well documented, well researched, well written out. But we have these policies at the national level, and the subnationals are not really replicating. And if we would achieve the kind of impact we are looking to achieve, the subnationals need to be strongly onboarded to also cascade it down to the local levels. Also speed. With speed, financing is important. With financing, the absorptive capacity, like Prof highlighted, is also very important. But when we have situations when we are not able to have the local capacity to develop bankable projects, then there's a problem. We won't be able to achieve what we need to achieve in the time we need to achieve some of those things. So what do we do? Again, the banks come in, the financial institutions come in. There are these big figures internationally on the kind of monies available for climate change. But these monies are not trickling down. What do we need to do? We need to create the capacity within the subnationals, not just the nationals, to develop these projects to be able to absorb the kind of fundings that can come. And again, we need to be very deliberate about the financing instruments that we need to come up with to finance climate change projects. With mitigation, there are a wide variety of financing instruments that have been used because oftentimes it's easier to demonstrate ROIs on mitigation projects. But with adaptation projects, very few financing instruments have been deployed. And it's simply because the risk in some cases are high. So we need to think about how to generate these things to ensure that we can finance this project at speed and at scale. Prof talked about not being able to, some cases where research does not effectively inform policy. I work as technical advisor to the governor of Ekiti State on green economy and ecological management. And some of the things we've done is to try and see the projects we've done, what has worked, what has not worked, so as to develop very practical policies out of that. So where we are not able to fund extensive activities to present policies, we can look at the intervention projects we are doing across the state, look at what has worked and what is not working, and create a policy out of that. I served as project coordinator for Nigeria Erosion Watershed Management Project in Ekiti State. And we did some afforestation projects there, and we found out that what would work, or the places where the afforestation was successful, were places where you had very local, strong engagement, where you have farmer communities within the forest reserves, and they were actively engaged and supported with their livelihoods, to make the trees grow. And the success rate was higher. And so if we prioritize these locally led adaptation projects and put them at scale, give them the right financial backing, the right financial instrument that can de-risk some of the risks associated with these interventions, we can make a lot of progress in little time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akinyuga. Next special intervention will come from Mrs. M.M. Okun, from the Kabekatsi project. Thank you. Please, a round of applause.
Good afternoon, all. As introduced, I'm Eme Mokon. I work with Kabekatsi Women Development and Resource Center. We are based in Port Harcourt. I appreciate Mr. Waziri Adiu for inviting me to be here in person. I appreciate the panelists. I appreciate particularly the female members of the panel for amplifying the issues and the challenges of women while they were making their contributions. Thank you very much. I live and work in the Niger Delta. Our problem is worse because of the oil and gas extraction activities. The environment is destroyed. The UNEP report that was released after assessment of the environment in Ogoni said that both surface water and underground water contains poisonous substances. That was Ogoni. But then Ogoni is the test case for the Niger Delta. So which means we drink polluted water. Everybody takes pure water. We call it pure water, but how pure is it? So we are all vulnerable. We breathe polluted air because of over 6 decades of flaring toxic gases into the atmosphere. And I also want to say that that toxic air might not only be in the Niger Delta because the air moves. So people in Abuja and other parts of Nigeria are also directly or indirectly inhaling the toxic air. So we are vulnerable. Farmlands have been destroyed. Lands have been taken from communities. And when it comes to women, women are worse off, as was explained by the panelists, because traditionally, women don't own lands. These days, women who have money buy their land. But women at the community level, they depend on land, portions of land that their husbands or fathers give them to farm. And they engage in subsistence farming. When these portions of land are taken by governments and extraction corporations, they are left without sources of income. So destruction of that traditional livelihood leaves them vulnerable. Over the years, it has been like that. And these women are not consulted. That came out strongly from the panel. Now, these scenarios makes climate crisis in the Niger Delta much worse than in other places because we are already suffering from this deprivation and devastation. And then the Petroleum Industry Act that was recently put in place is not also helping us. The Petroleum Industry Act is indicting communities for the pollution because of artisanal refining activities without looking at the genesis of the problem. So the act says if there is pollution or oil spillage and it is proven that it is caused by third-party intervention, the community forfeits the 3% that the community would have gotten as a result of that pollution. And who determines whether that spillage is caused by third-party intervention? The problem is already there. A couple of weeks ago, we held corporate accountability forum. And in that meeting, NOSDRA presented data. Out of about 800 incidents of oil spillage in a certain year, I think that was 2022, only 6 is caused by equipment failure. The rest, over 300, 400, are said to be caused by third-party intervention in the community. So there is no hope for community members, particularly the women. So when it comes to the climate crisis, we are very vulnerable. Flooding every year. And this flooding affects community members more than other persons. All these years we have been experiencing flooding. There has been no sustainable measure adopted to address it or to even mitigate the impact. Every year it happens, community members move to school buildings that are on upland. Everybody is crowded in a hall, no privacy for women, no water to drink. Every relief material they get is either rice, indomie, yam, and nobody thinks of water to use and cook or the fire to use and cook. And they stay there coping with the environment. When the flood recedes, they go back and try to put their house in place. So we need to look at this. When we are talking about climate responses, if the policies or measures adopted does not address the challenges of these community members, particularly the women, then we have not solved the problem. So we need to look at that. After the Federal Ministry of Environment adopted the Gender and Climate Change Action Plan, what we have done over the past 2 years is advocating for that document to be localized. Most local government areas don't even understand their responsibilities when it comes to responding to the climate crisis. So there is need for the actions taken at the national level to be transmitted down to the local level. Having said that, I want to say that talking about green economy, that will create more business for corporations. So when corporations and government are thinking of infrastructure, we should be able to consider, does these infrastructures meet the needs of community members, or are they promoting the interests of corporations? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Okon. Right now I've been informed that Mr. Suleiman would like to take his leave at the moment. So I just encourage you to take the green room. Thank you so much for being part of the panel and for your insightful contribution. Please, a round of applause for him. Okay. So we take some questions and interventions, 1 minute each from the audience. I think we can take 3, and then we will, yeah, so Lois has the microphone already. All right, please go ahead, Lois.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lois Auta. I'm from the Cedar Seed Foundation. Well done, brilliant panelists and moderator. And thank you, Agora Policy, for organizing this. In Nigeria, we have a law on disability that states that 5% of opportunities reserved for citizens with disabilities. I wish Mr. Suleiman here to respond, because so I want to know, in their work, in their agenda, in their project, are they really implementing the 5% reservation for persons with disabilities? Thank you very much. Social inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. A round of applause. I think just to repeat, she's asking about practicing the compliance with the 5% provision of the Disability Rights Prohibition of Discrimination on Disability Act of 2018. Sorry. Please, we need a microphone that works so that we don't have the voices being cut off as we take the second person. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Comrade George Wilcox. I represent as the chairman of Abadetoro Mangal Community Development Initiative.
Which community?
Abadetoro means coastal.
Okay.
Courtesy of CAC. They don't want it in English. Thank you. Okay. Our sister from Makato, right?
No, Ford Foundation.
Ford Foundation. Thank you very much. I would like to give a name, because you said we should look at a name, possibly a name that will really help climate change to look the way it is, to the knowledge of even those at the grassroots. And I have something to say. What is fossil? Fossil, I think the full word is fossilid. Now, I want to really expatiate on that from a geographical and legal frame. The law is an acronym for land, atmosphere, and water. Now, when you put fossilid or fossil, flaring, whatever, in front of the L, it becomes floor. And what does it mean? Fossilid simply means bombardment of our land, which gives birth to drought. The atmosphere, bombarding the atmosphere with their so-called fossilid or fossil flaring and whatever, it brings about the hotness we are experiencing. And what about the waters? She said it over there. The spills. We have a lot of spills ongoing. So I would like to just let this Agora policy really look at this critically, because we are facing a lot of it down the Niger Delta. I'm from Bayelsa State as well, because we are looking at the conservation of our mangrove ecosystem, which has been one way or the other colonized for whatever reasons. And to our prof, Daddy Gio, yes, well done, sir. Yes, I'll call you Daddy Gio at this extent, because we are looking at how we can help in resolving these climate change issues, as in to really bring it to the point of policy decisions, as the case may be. Agora, please let them take note of this. Our pastors, religiously speaking, one way or the other, in fact, they've made believers to believe that climate change effect is more like the end time signs. So all they'll say is, qui sera, what will be, or probably let's just stay on the place of I surrender and wait for this whole thing to come the other way around. Recently, sir, I'm about to round up now. Recently, I think the spiritual leaders were incorporated into political and governance in the country, and for our stakeholders, please let them as well come in as climate governance in the country as stakeholders, so that they will be well acquainted by virtue of your prowess in climate change issues, so that they would rather go back and teach their believers or followers what climate change is all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Round of applause.
Yes,
so one final.
Now, if we can accommodate just one more from the representing the managing director of RIA, Electrification Agency, additional to the lady, please.
All right, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abamete Isa, and I'm a student journalist and also a climate advocate. So my question is rather just simple and straightforward. What measures can I put as like a citizen, as an individual, as a student, to curb this problem, even though I know that climate change is unavoidable? Or rather, what are the sustainable practices that I can adopt to make the situation better in terms greenhouse gas emissions to get a more positive climate response. Because just like Mr. Abubakar said, it is millions of tiny, small actions carried out by small people. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more from here.
Thank you, Wazir Aju. My name is Abba Aliu. I'm the head of the project management unit of the Nigeria Electrification Project, a project funded by the World Bank and African Development Bank under the Rural Electrification Agency. The little contribution that I will just want to make is, in as much as we know that there are a lot of issues, right? But there are a number of very critical things that the federal governments are doing. The federal government is doing currently to address some of these challenges. And it's very important for us to be acknowledging such initiative. For example, the project that I had is a $350 million project, right? Funded by the World Bank and $200 million by African Development, a total of $550 million. This is the biggest off-grid funded project that supports off-grid electrification in a sustainable manner in the entire Africa. Beyond that, based on the success recorded, we deployed about 110 mini grids, deployed over 1.5 million solar home system. We are doing mega projects in about 15 universities, right, to take the universities off grid. And we have deployed containerized 100 kilowatt in about 100 hospitals and teaching hospitals, right? Beyond that, based on this success recorded, the federal government currently is discussing with the World Bank to design a project called DARE, Distributed Access to Renewable Energy, which will be the biggest funded off-grid project in the entire world, right? This project is about to come in next year in any way. And it's designed based on the success recorded under NEP to continue to deploy this. And in this regard, we are looking at deploying close to thousands mini-grid. And in all this design, we were able to integrate inclusion in some areas, sustainability. Just last 3 weeks, the Minister of Power commissioned the first interconnected mini-grid in an area called Toto in Nasarawa, an area that has not been with electricity for over 20 years. The deployment of that mini-grid created access to over 200,000 people and created the leverage for about 144 businesses to come into being. So this kind of initiative, as we are discussing, is good to be acknowledging this kind of initiative. And when we are doing this policy, to factor this, because a lot is being done. Of course, maybe we are not publicizing as much as we can, but a lot is being done. The aspect of the $750 million project that is coming, that is coming into being, we could need to crystallize about 1.1 billion private sector investment. And based on that, we are already discussing with IFC. They have committed $100 million revolving fund, Palladium 75 million, Stanbic IBTC and Standard Chartered. They are all committing this. And all this is going to be provided to developers to continue to create this sustainable access in the areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that government perspective. So I think I'll just give the panelists 1 minute each to respond to the issues raised, and we will end the session. Thank you. Prof.
Thank you very much. I wouldn't waste more time. Just a clarification. The title General Overseer is not for... Mine is a ministry that all Nigerians belong to, because climate change is part of us. It affects everyone, whether you're a Christian, Muslim, man, woman, and everybody is affected. And because I've been talking about climate change for the past 40 years, people see me like I'm more or less the oldest of all that have been talking about it. So it's not a ministry where you pay tithes and no offering, nothing. It has no church, it has no building, but all of you are members. And you have to be members because you can do a lot on your own. A lot of things you can do. Many things we take for granted. Even in the process, if you go back to the law of building Nigeria, ideally, in the Town Planning Act or something like that, we are supposed to leave about 40% of our land for greening. But we are contributing to climate, the warming, because remember, those of us that were old enough to remember what Ikoyi was in the days of the colonialists. You will see a huge compound of about 3 or 4 plots with only 2 or 3 bedroom bungalow, and maybe another 1 bedroom for the cook or something like that. Before you enter the guy's house, you drive through a very lush green environment. That was the place planned to be absorbing the water when it rains, so that Ikoyi will not be flooded. Immediately, those lands have been sold to Nigerians. An average plot of land was demarcated into about 4 or 5 places with huge buildings, everything concretized. No more greening, nothing to absorb the water, so Ikoyi has to be flooded. And these are the times, the only way you cannot develop, this is what climate change is telling us, you cannot develop the whole sector of Ajah and Lekki Peninsula the way we are developing it without being ready to get flood. It's just the beginning, because we should have taken the whole landscape as one, map it out, take all the elevations, decide where the water will be going, do all the landscape, do all the infrastructure before you start selling the land. But we don't do that in Nigeria, and so we are contributing to climate change by removing the grass, by removing the trees, therefore you're creating more warming. And that's why Lagos is becoming so hot and continue to be hot. Finally, we have to recognize the following. And I think anybody in government here we should praise this government for that blue economy ministry. We are not understanding it. The largest storage of carbon dioxide is in the sea. If the sea temperature conditions continue to rise because of our bad attitude of emitting CO2, the temperature of the sea may be such that those carbon dioxide may start to bubble. And definitely they will create a lot of more havoc. We are only lucky in Nigeria that a lot of the hurricane effects that are more or less sea generated take place after leaving us, because it's the same system that gives us rain that go all the way to Senegal, and then when it leaves Senegal to move to becomes hurricanes, and you can see the intensity of hurricane have been increasing. So the more we do this, the more we can. Finally, individually, learn to save energy now. Learn. If you're a housewife, don't put a whole kettle of water. I keep on telling people, don't put a whole kettle of water on your gas because your husband wants to drink a cup of tea. You are wasting energy and you are contributing more to CO2. And government has to recognize that in order to create this just environment we are talking about, you cannot continue saying we don't want to do subsidy or want to do subsidy, but you don't want people to cut down the trees. At the same time, the price of gas is beyond what the people can afford. Whatever the way you do it, people have to live and they have to cut the trees because they cannot afford the gas. So there must be a balance. It's a total holistic approach that we need for our development, and don't treat climate change as an existent issue, but rather as part of our development. Finally, the climate has changed in the past, it's changing now, and it will change forever and ever. Don't worry about it. All we need to do is to understand the changes more and learn how to live with it, to exceed and to survive. Thank you very much.
Tengi?
Okay, so to the point about the Disability Act, I just wanted to mention that obviously throughout my interventions, I've emphasized our commitment to people-centered engagement and the need to include the voices of marginalized groups. And so we're very interested in having further conversations with you on how we can further deepen the inclusion of those with disabilities. And then to the comment about the youth, what the youth can do, I'll borrow from a phrasing that was made earlier. There are more youth than there are other segments of the population in Nigeria. And if you have a lot more awareness and information within the youth and innovations as well, being introduced to energy transition, will get there faster than we are. So there's that responsibility to ensure that you are well informed and you're able to engage meaningfully with your government at all different levels of the government. And also, I would also bring in here as well the media and civil society, which hasn't really been emphasized during this conversation. They have a significant role to play, and they're always able to ensure that the general public have the right information and access to data and evidence to better understand the impacts of climate change and energy transition on the Nigerian economy and on each of our lives. So I think taking advantage of that synergy, I think, is also important to ensuring that we achieve the objectives that we're trying to seek. And then one last final thing for the government and all of us here is just to say that it is very important that as we do this engagement, that we reflect on our own roles in this energy transition and ensure that we also hold the government accountable to the different commitments that are being made. It's not enough to come and listen and to let this be just another intervention or talk that you had, but to make sure that after this, the evidence that has been developed by Agora policy doesn't just rest on your desks, but you actually use that information to engage the government and to increase your own understanding and awareness of the issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. I think you answered the question for the young journalists, what to do. I just want to add that as a journalist, we need your voice, we need your pen, and the spaces that you have influence in to continue to talk about this more, and to break it down in such a way that the ordinary Nigerian can understand. The elitization of climate change conversation is actually what we're suffering from. We need to break it down as much as possible. It's not just a conversation for the elite or government alone or civil society organizations. It's a conversation that we should be having at all levels. The same way we did it with HIV and AIDS, where every Tom, Dick, and Harry at a certain point in time knew about the ABC approach to ending HIV/AIDS. If we make it that important and simplify it as possible, even the same way we do voter education, then everyone will be on board. And I think we need the media to help with that simplification. The second point I wanted to make is about the person from government who talked about what government is doing. I don't know how many of us knew about those projects. I absolutely did not. So this is also about making climate change conversation just the right. It's now a right to know. It's at the level of a right to know. Perhaps Mr. Waziri of Agora Policy would know. Perhaps my brother Adoloju would know. But I'm sure most of us here don't know. And so if government is doing something and we don't know about it, there's no way we can amplify what government is doing. The media should know about it. At least across this room, you would find experts in the climate change, natural resource sector who don't even know about all these resources coming from the World Bank and the work that the Electricity Agency is doing. So talking about it, telling us it should not be a secret that should just be shared in an elite environment. And the third point and last point is about persons with disability. Lois, I think that we should come to a point where we should stop asking as persons with disability. You know, I'm part of your constituencies. That's what I'm saying. We should stop asking, but now begin to lead policy and conversation on that. I would like to see a disability conversation or policy developed for climate change that you present to government, you present to the National Assembly, you author with NESG or Agora Policy and say, this is our demand, and do an analysis of how climate change will impact persons with disability and what needs to be done to mitigate or adapt, as the case may be. Thank you.
Please, final round of applause for the panel. I think with this, we've come to the end of the panel session. I think we're going to have to take a picture here.
Yes. Please, while you remain, I would ask Waziri Adio to please join. We'll just stand for the session. But I also invite our friend and brother, the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, Dr. Tayo Aduloju, to also join us up here. Thank you. As we do this session, may I also invite, yes, I think I should invite Mrs. M.M. Okon. Please join us up here for this photo session. Thank you. Can we have this quickly? The photo session, please, quickly. Thank you. If Ms. Zainab Nasri Mohammed is still in the house, of the NNPC Environmental Strategy Policy Advisor, still in the house, can you join us if you are? Because there's so much talk about fossil fuels and fossil energy. We thank you very much. I know while that was going on, a representative of the Nigeria Governors Forum, representing the Director General, Mr. Ebio Kauru, joined us. Is the head of the SDG desk, Mr. Egusa Amoigui. Thank you very much, Mr. Amoigui, for your presence here. I think it's somewhere over there. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. We are indeed honored by your presence. Thank you. Environmentally friendly smile. Yes. Don't go far.
If you stay. No,
we're calling you now. She wants to bring a note. Thank you very much, Daddy Gio of the environment. The journalist has christened you Daddy Gio. Thank you very much, Prof. We are indeed honored by your presence and all of those who have been a part of this process. Professor Chuks Okereke, Dr. Kole Shatima, Mr. Abubakar Suleiman, Chido Onuma, and all of those who have been a part of this. At this point, it gives me especially great pleasure to invite co-founder, Clint Technology Hub, Ms. Ifeoma Malo, to move the vote of thanks. Please let's put our hands together for her. Thank you.
Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. The day is fast spent, so I will be brief. When Waziri pulled this group together to write this policy brief, I'm not sure any of us knew what we were in for. To start with, I mean, this is, even though I've known Waziri for a long, long time, many years now, this is the first time I'm actively working with him on a project. He is a tax master. So if he invites you to do work for him, get ready to work. It also did not help our matter that we had 2 professors on the team. Outside of Waziri, we had Professor Chukwumerije Okereke, and of course, our Daddy G.O. We had Professor Emmanuel Oladipo. He says he's retired, but he can never be tired in Jesus' name. Then, of course, we had my colleague, Fola Aino, Dr. Fola Aino. It was a process that took us through several iterations of this publication, several arguments, several disagreements, several points of convergence, and finally, a damn good policy brief. So on behalf of my co-authors and everybody who is a part of bringing this to life, on behalf of Agora Policy, on behalf of the esteemed panelists, many friends, Amara Funke, Tengi, Abubakar, and of course, Prof. On behalf of everyone who helped to design and bring this to light, the staff at Agora Policy, who I know are very, very hardworking, and also MacArthur Foundation, who puts their money behind bringing out the first intergenerational climate change and socioeconomic development policy brief in Nigeria. Would like to say a huge thank you to all of you. What this policy brief is 5 things. It's an advocacy tool to help shape policy, help catalyze the private sector, the development, the media sectors, and of course build community around theories of change. It's an intervention tool around adaptability and mitigation when we talk about climate in Nigeria. It's an investment tool helping to catalyze catalytic funding to address a lot of our climate emergency. And it's a change tool where we can use it and change the trajectory of our climate future in Nigeria and our natural resource governance from a policy regulatory framework. I thank you all for being here. We thank you for your time, and we thank you for listening. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Ifeanyi. Thank you. Thank you for the great job that you've done. We'll have some refreshment out there. When we step out, we'll be attended to, and then some of our other guests have some refreshments packaged for them as well. But before we leave, please, can we all rise for the national anthem? Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you. So some refreshments out there in the foyer for us.